One day, a terrible explosion occurred in the city, which did not bode well for humanity. After that, the gate to the other world opened, and monsters and evil spirits began to emerge from this portal, threatening everyone around them. These monsters destroyed everything they saw and killed thousands of people. All of humanity was depressed, and more than ever, they needed heroes to save them all. The monsters were very different, and their level of power was also different, but they all had the same goal: to destroy humanity. It was during this difficult time for everyone that they appeared as extraordinary people who fought against evil and saved the world. The portal was not closed for a long time, and the battle for survival continued unabated. The heroes who gave humanity a chance for a normal life were called the Awakened Ones. They tirelessly destroyed monsters with magical powers and magic weapons. The monsters had no chance to save their lives because the heroes of the new time were ruthless to evil forces. When the monsters saw them in front of them, they realized that the time to say goodbye to life was instantaneous for them because it was almost impossible to resist the Awakened Ones. The explosions were so powerful that the evil spirits did not have the strength to harm the heroes who stood up to defend humanity. After the battles were over, there were a lot of monster bodies in the city that needed to be properly disposed of. It was difficult enough to simply load the giant bodies somewhere and take them away, so the work was done differently. If someone managed to get the prey from the monsters, they could be considered a millionaire because such finds were highly valued. And people's thirst to profit from this overshadowed their reason, and they tried to snatch the most precious part of the monster for themselves. But one day, the monster that was supposedly eliminated came back to life and went on his hunt. And fortunately, the Awakened reacted in time to join the fight. After that, all the Awakened began to be called Hunters, because they hunted all the monsters that needed to be destroyed. The Hunters were distinguished by their strength of spirit, physical fitness, and readiness to rush to the rescue when the situation seemed irreparable. Every day, the number of monster bodies was growing, and such a profession as an assistant hunter or monster fighter appeared. Their uniforms and equipment differed significantly from those of the Hunters, and to be more precise, they were completely different. They had to wear a respirator and goggles, and many had chainsaws or something similar. Their job was to dismantle the monster's carcass and send it to the resource center in pieces. There was never anything pleasant about this pile of giant bones, and the smell was especially awful. You had to work so well that everyone around you would approve of your hard work. After all, it was the only chance to say goodbye to the profession of a hunter's assistant and become a hunter and fighter of monsters himself. In the middle of the forest, a strong wind could be heard blowing, and the trees obeyed it without resisting. Suddenly, the guy woke up and realized that it was just a dream, and he was actually in his room in a cozy bed. The guy's name was Ji Heng. He was 28 years old and worked as a hunter's assistant. He got out of bed and went to brush his teeth to get cleaned up before a hard day at work. He was brushing his teeth and thinking that tomorrow was going to be a good day, and he really wanted to believe it. The boy tried to analyze his dream, in which he saw his grandfather telling Ji Hyun that everything would change soon. The young man closed his eyes while washing his face and seemed to dream again. The boy recalled how his grandmother was once angry because his grandfather had stolen yogurt for him because they had no money at the time. He recalled how he cried bitterly and begged his grandmother to forgive his grandfather, but it was all in vain. Ji Hyun remembered that day well because it was his last day with his grandfather and he never saw him again, but he remembered his instructions to make the young man happy. Since then, Ji Hyun will never refuse to help an elderly person with full bags or something like that, and most of his salary goes to charity. The guy did it out of his own kindness, because he knew how hard it was to live without money and any help from the outside. Ji Hyun often remembered his grandfather and the words he used to say because he could not fully understand what they meant. The young man was sure that to be happy is to help those in need. There were a lot of accidents in the city that day, and some roads were closed, so the radio informed drivers that pedestrians could walk on the roadway. Ji Hyun was traveling on a green bus, heading to the boy's workplace. The young man was driving and thinking about how many cities suffered because of the opening of the portals, and yet it was good that a barrier appeared that prevents the portals from opening frequently. Over time, the city's residents got used to the new realities and knew that they had to continue living no matter what. Ji Hyun reached the 20th dungeon, where he was faced with a lot of work and hard physical labor. The guy walked up to the door and put his finger on the fingerprint reader. His identity was confirmed, and he was allowed to enter. The young man was not really in the mood to work and was in a bit of a gloomy mood. He thought that there had been a lot of monsters lately and that it meant something bad, but he immediately tried to push the bad thoughts away, attributing them to his bad mood. The assistants of the hunters were at their workplace and complained to each other that the hunters did not think about them at all because the men had to clean up after them. Ji Hyun got to work and wondered how big a monster he would have to disassemble. He did everything as carefully as possible because he remembered his first monster, which stank so badly that he couldn't even eat when it was time for lunch. He cut out each part separately so as not to damage important parts and not to smell the stench again, which was hard to forget. The young man gained skill with each new monster that the hunters killed. Undead monsters were left in the dungeons in order not to endanger humanity, because no one could know for sure whether this or that monster would come back to life. One of the men came up to Ji Heng and told him that he was doing a great job and that he was the best among the newcomers. The young man was a little ashamed, but his mentor supported him and said that he should be proud of the fact that he was doing a great job. The man said that recently there has been a lot of work and Ji Hyun has been working tirelessly and showed the boy a like. The man was supported by another colleague who confirmed that Ji Hyun is really the best and gave the young man another like. Others heard that Ji Heng was being praised and were happy to support him, and everyone liked him, saying that he was really talented and wanted to promote him. Ji Hyun continued to work and did not suspect anything, and suddenly received a message that he had received an award and was now a hunter. Suddenly, the guy began to feel something unusual in his body after receiving a notification that his abilities began to awaken. Ji Hung began to be enveloped by magical energy that penetrated every cell of his body. Everything began to burn inside him. It was the first time in his life that he felt this way, and he did not understand what kind of awakening the message was about. The chainsaw fell to the floor as Ji Hyun was trying to figure out what abilities he might have. The young man's colleagues saw something strange happening and rushed to help Ji Heng, who had almost no control over his movements. The guy turned around and said that everything was fine and that his legs just went numb and he stopped feeling his limbs for a moment. The men smiled and said that Ji Hyun worked so hard that he should rest and not overwork himself in the future. Colleagues began to leave and noted that many employees were injured due to overwork, so they should take care of their health. Ji Hyun didn't understand what had happened, but he knew that he should first calm down and collect his thoughts. The boy noticed that he had a micro camera on his clothes that was filming everything in real time. The young man was pleased to feel like a hunter, even though he could not dream of it. The mentor shouted at Ji Hyun to finish his work and not to stand still. Ji Hyun wondered why his abilities had awakened, as this happens before the age of 20, although last year a man in his 31st year was lucky. The guy realized that he was already 28, and it was unlikely that he would awaken at that age, so he decided that he was imagining things. Ji Hyun still thought that if everything turned out to be true, it would be a pleasant surprise for him, even though the young man was not sure of his abilities. The young man could not understand whether he should be happy or not, because becoming a hunter is very responsible and dangerous. In the battle with the monsters, many of the hunters lost their lives, but Ji Hyun was curious to see the hunters work with his own eyes. Ji Hyun received notifications one after another that he had to check his status, but he continued to work. He was getting tired of the notifications not stopping and constantly telling him that his status had changed. His colleagues called him and asked if he had finished his work. Ji Hyun replied that he was leaving and started to pack. Again, the notification was coming, and the young man was getting really annoyed, but he couldn't do anything about it at that very moment. Suddenly, he noticed a team of hunters standing nearby, talking about something and saying that he shouldn't tell anyone yet. Ji Hyun did not hear what they were talking about, and began to think that hunters have a lot of privileges, such as untouchable pensions and gun licenses. And I immediately thought that in addition to these privileges, they have a huge responsibility. Every time a new dungeon appears, they have to risk their lives. Ji Hyun finished his work and headed to the locker room to get ready to go home, but all the thoughts of what happened to him never left him for a moment. The boy was thinking about the fact that the hunter's assistants have a chance of survival in case of monster attack, but the chances of hunters are much less. When the young man came out of the dungeon and met his colleagues, one of the men once again pointed out that Ji Hyun was doing a great job. And all the other colleagues immediately supported him and said that without his help, they would not have been able to cope with such a large amount of work. The men showed the young man the likes again, and he immediately received a notification that he had received these likes in the bonus system. Ji Hyun didn't understand what was happening and why he was receiving the notification again, since he hadn't done anything this time. The men boarded the bus and headed home after a hard day's work in the dungeon. Ji Hyun came home and tried to find where he had put the pasta he was going to have for dinner. The guy was not feeling well, so he took out some pills to drink some painkillers to make him feel better. The young man thought that now he would have to lie down for about 3 days to get back to his normal state and be able to continue working. He couldn't even move without feeling pain, and he realized that it would be dangerous to work in this condition. Ji Hyun heard the notification sound again, asking him to confirm his status, but he didn't understand what status it was. The young man had heard before that after the world was swallowed up by chaos, beings called gods appeared, and they could choose who would have magical powers. It was difficult to realize that God really exists, but after his appearance, people with abilities began to appear. Ji Hyun continued to think about whether he needed to awaken these abilities in himself and how this could end for him. The boy took a can of drink from the refrigerator to quench his thirst and cope with his worries about the appearance of his powers. He gained strength and finally decided that he should try to change his status. Ji Hyun opened his profile without much optimism and began to look at all the tabs that were available to him. Everything started to work, and the guy wondered if this was the awakening he had been informed about the day before. Ji Hyun mentally recalled all the time he had spent working as a hunter's assistant, and a subtle smile appeared on his face. A profile of the young man loaded on the screen, saying that he had been chosen as the new star of the platform because of the god's interest in him. It took Ji Heng a while to figure out the platform's settings, and he accidentally went live. The guy desperately tried to turn off the live broadcast, but because of the excitement, he could not do it immediately. Suddenly, the young man remembered his grandfather, who asked him to live happily, and showed Ji-hyun something he remembered from his childhood. But the boy was in no hurry to draw conclusions about his grandfather's involvement in everything that was happening to him. The young man decided to try what was ahead and pressed the start button. He was informed that from now on, he would receive tasks on this platform. From now on, the level can be increased with the help of likes that the youngster can collect on this platform. Ji-hyun couldn't understand what was going on and what promotion they were talking about on the platform. Then there was an explanation that usually you can get extra points by taking the life of a monster. You can also participate in auctions and sell valuable items that can be found in dungeons. Ji-hyun couldn't believe that this was really happening to him and decided to check his status to confirm or deny the new information. A window popped up in front of the young man, stating that his endurance and intelligence were at level D, and his magic power was at level F. Rank was beginner. Ji-hyun was shocked that this was happening to him and could not believe that he was now a user of this platform. He slowly began to put his thoughts together and did not believe that he was actually chosen by God and could use magic. The guy was trying to figure out what was going to happen to him now and whether he should worry about it at all. And he decided to mentally ask his grandfather how he should treat this gift. Ji-hyun read the next message, which advised him to increase his rating by collecting likes. The boy remembered the figure of his grandfather who showed him a like, and the young man thought it was a sign. However, he first tried to log out of the platform and disconnect the system to delete his account. Ji-hyun looked at his profile again and began to think that he could and should leave the platform and develop his strength to fight monsters on his own. But his experience told him that it was better to choose magic because it would be a priority during the battle. Finally, Ji-hyun weighed the pros and cons and chose what to spend his likes bonuses on, and he chose magic. Still, it seemed to him that the offer was not very profitable because he had to spend a significant amount of bonuses, and the skill level would increase to only F. The guy closed his eyes and asked himself in his mind whether to spend or not, and in a split second, he decided to spend. The young man pressed the confirmation button and immediately received a notification that his magic level had risen to level F, and now his body was filled with magical energy. Suddenly, Ji-hyun felt his body changing again and being enveloped in magic from head to toe. He couldn't fully understand whether it was really a magical effect or something else. His heart began to beat crazily as if it was about to jump out of his chest, and the guy was unable to calm down his body's reaction. Ji-hyun dared to open his eyes and saw a magical vortex forming right in his hand. The young man could not believe his eyes and that this was really happening to him. The magical power that circulated in the boy's body was supposed to temporarily increase his strength and endurance. Ji-hyun began to understand the rules of the platform and realized that thanks to the likes, he could raise his level, but there was no question of abilities. Suddenly, the platform offered the young man to buy abilities, but he had very few bonuses left. Ji-hyun decided to open the ability window to see what was on offer and was shocked by the wide range of choices to improve himself. His head was spinning because it was very difficult to choose one thing from the entire list. He kept reading all the abilities on the list, but it never ended. There were so many suggestions that it was impossible to even read everything. The guy was just going crazy with the fact that there was a huge list of different skills and they could all be bought. It seemed that Ji-hyun's nervous system could not take it anymore because there was too much new information and sensations for one day. The guy hopelessly tried to separate the abilities on the platform that could be purchased for the 2 bonus points he had left. Even after this separation of offers, there were more than 400 left, and the young man was definitely shocked because he thought that his bonuses would not be enough for anything. Ji-hyun decided to choose from the options offered by the platform and was surprised to find that among all the skills, there was even the ability to massage. The guy started thinking about how this ability could help him collect likes and thought it was like being able to give a regular massage. But he knew a lot of people who worked hard every day and could definitely use a massage to relax for a few minutes. And he came up with the idea that this was a great chance to get the likes he needed to improve his level. Ji-hyun decided that thanks to the massage skill, he would be able to increase his likes by at least 2 times and acquired this ability for himself. In the morning, Ji-hyun went to work as usual at the headquarters of the assistant hunters. In the locker room, he met his senior colleague, Mr. Kim. The young man was a little surprised that the man had arrived at work so early. The man spoke kindly to the boy as they changed into their work uniforms to get to work. Mr. Kim asked the young man why he came to work today because he didn't feel very well after his last day at work. But Ji-hyun said that Mr. Kim could use a rest himself because their work is really not easy. The guy was adjusting the collar of his shirt and remembered his mini camera that was constantly filming. The young man asked Mr. Kim if he could watch a video of how hunters do it somewhere, and the man asked why he needed to. Ji-hyun replied that he was just wondering if the hunters' assistants could watch the video as well as the hunters. Mr. Kim said that they may have watched the video, but the contract stated that they had to keep it confidential. He added that it would be unpleasant if someone posted the video on the internet, and that no one would want to look at the lifeless bodies of monsters. Mr. Kim added that hunters most likely have their own conditions for cooperation and therefore have their own privileges. The man looked at Ji Heng and informed him that they would be working together all day today. After all, it is easier to work in pairs than alone, and they will support each other. Mr. Kim told the young man that it was time to go, and together they walked to the bus that would take them to their workplace. At the end of the conversation, Ji Hyun thanked Mr. Kim for the conversation and support, and the man gave the boy a like as a sign that everything was fine. At that moment, Ji Hyun received a notification from the platform that he had received a new like, which surprised him because he did not know it worked that way. Halfway through the day, all the hunter's assistants went for a lunch break and rest. There were quite a few people in the hall, all tired from a lot of work, but still maintaining a positive attitude. The men said among themselves that they should not overeat because the amount of work was still quite large. Mr. Kim recalled his morning conversation with Ji Hyun and asked if he had asked about the cameras in the headquarters. Ji Hyun replied that he hadn't asked yet and immediately asked if the man had found out anything about it. He advised the young man not to take any chances because no one had ever asked such questions before and no one needed the videos for personal use. Ji Hyun was very grateful to his colleagues who were so concerned about him, they became a family to him. The guy told his colleagues that he had recently learned how to do massage and invited the men to try out the new skills he had mastered. Mr. Kim was surprised that the boy knew how to do massage, so he did not refuse and asked the boy to start working until his lunch break was over. The men moved to the restroom. Ji Hyun put a chair in a comfortable place and invited Mr. Kim to the procedure. But when Mr. Kim took the offered seat, Ji Hyun began to worry whether he would be able to give a good massage and not disappoint his colleague. But I gathered my thoughts anyway and decided to try it, because until you try, you don't know whether it will work or not. Ji Hyun started by stretching his muscles to avoid injury. Mr. Kim said that he had not had a massage for a long time, so he was pleased that the young man offered to help him. The guy started working with a positive attitude and was eager to master his new skill. He gradually kneaded every part of the neck and back without missing a single piece of surface to leave a positive impression of his work. Ji Hyun began to notice that he was not quite in control of his hands and became a little nervous about it. The boy's hands moved as if on automatic without requiring any effort or mental load. The man sat motionless and only managed to say how well the young man knew how to massage. Ji Hyun did not stop, and suddenly his hands went down to the lumbar region of the back, and the guy felt that he should pay special attention to this part of the back. It was clear from Mr. Kim's reaction that Ji Hyun had found a sore spot that had been bothering him for quite some time. Ji Hyun, seeing this reaction, began to worry about stopping, but Mr. Kim told him to continue doing what he was doing. After a few minutes of massage, Mr. Kim claimed that his back was as good as new, and he was no longer bothered by the pain that bothered him every day. The men standing around were amazed at the boy's skill and asked where he had learned it, and they couldn't even keep up with his hand movements. Mr. Kim turned to the young man and sincerely thanked Ji Hyun for helping him, and showed him a like to thank him. Ji Hyun was incredibly happy that he had not been in vain in acquiring this skill the day before. One by one, the boy's colleagues began to queue up for a massage with Ji Hyun to see for themselves the young man's skills. Ji Hyun didn't want to turn anyone away, so he immediately started on his next client. One by one, the men on the chair were replaced, and the guy kept giving massages to everyone. The young man's hands moved with incredible speed, and it seemed that Ji Hyun was not tired at all. He received likes from everyone who came to him for a massage. The guy decided not to stop at back massages, and got so excited that he massaged all the problem areas of his colleagues. Another like was added to the joint bank of achievements, which made the young man incredibly happy. Ji Hyun was excited that he would soon be able to collect a large number of likes and buy new skills in the platform's store. Ji Hyun instantly thought that massage is a passive skill and does not require the use of magical power. The guy thought that he should try to put magical energy into his hands during the massage, and he would be able to achieve a better result. The young man concentrated and tried to realize his plans because he was sure that he would succeed. He started to work using his new method, and the man sitting in the chair seemed to be electrocuted and could not sit silently. The man could not understand what had just happened, what the young man had done that made him feel as if he were thrown up on his chair. He started to ask the boy where he had learned it, but Ji Hyun had no intention of revealing his secret, because as soon as his colleagues found out that he was a hunter, they would immediately turn their backs on him. Suddenly, he felt that something was happening to him, and thanks to the fact that he helped many people, his level of massage skills increased. Ji Hyun couldn't believe that he had managed to develop a skill he had acquired just one day earlier so quickly. The young man's colleagues hadn't all tried the guy's skills yet, so they wanted to get a massage, but Ji Hyun was worried about how his level up would affect them. The men did not restrain their pleasure from Ji Hyun's skill because the sensations after the massage were simply incredible. It felt like nothing hurt at all. Everyone was just delighted because even after treatment in the hospital, no one felt as good as they did after a massage with Ji Hyun. The men gave him one after another likes because they were incredibly grateful to him. Ji Hyun was pleased that he managed to earn so many likes thanks to the massage. After work, the men decided to support Ji Hyun and go with him to ask about the mini cameras. Ji Hyun was the first to ask a question that could help him get likes and bonuses on the platform. The director of the security guards was very surprised that the men came to him with such an unusual question. He listened attentively to the boy and did not take his eyes off him for a moment. After thinking carefully about the question Ji Hyun asked, he still couldn't understand why he needed the recordings from his body-worn camera. Ji Hyun looked at his boss and felt a little uncomfortable realizing that the director was so good-looking that their inequality was immediately apparent. He immediately recalled the rumors that the men had heard while working that the grandson of Chairman Man Dig-jong had taken over as director. The director asked Ji Heng whether his contract would expire at the end of the month. He immediately began to worry that he was going to be fired and what he should do to earn likes and bonuses. After the young man confirmed the information about his contract, the director invited him out to talk. Ji Heng's colleagues did not understand what was happening, nor did he understand what to expect from this conversation. Ji Hyun and the director left the office and the door closed behind them so that no one could hear their conversation. The director told the young man that he could not even expect that the hunter's assistant would come to him with a question about the video from the mini cameras. The man continued to say that the boy was very brave for daring to ask about using the video for his own purposes. Ji Hyun did not understand where the director was going with this and how their conversation could end. The director said that he had nothing against it at all, which surprised the guy and continued to say that he was currently looking for a suitable person. Ji Hyun did not quite understand what he was being offered, and the director said that everything would depend solely on the young man's decision. He said that like his other ancestors, he was taking over as CEO, and Ji Hyun was surprised that the man was indeed the grandson of the company's lovely chairman. The director continued his incomprehensible speech to the boy, and ended by saying that he would like to make a down payment, but Ji Hyun must keep it a secret. He added that the boy would receive a reward as soon as he reached the next level of skill. Ji Hyun didn't even realize that the director knew everything about him. After the conversation, the guy came to his colleagues, who immediately began to ask if everything was okay, and Ji Hyun said that he had no problems with the video or the contract. The young man happily showed the men the envelope and said that he had taken all the videos he needed, but he thought he meant the director. The men were glad that the guy was successful and had no problems, so they were sure that they worked for a good company that cares about its employees. Mr. Kim told the young man that he thought the principal would refuse them, but Ji Hyun did well to get his way. The men were heading for the exit and joked along the way that the director was afraid that they had come all together. They went to the bus stop and waited for each bus to go home to rest. Ji Hyun was traveling on a bus when suddenly something unexplainable started happening, like an earthquake. The guy did not understand what to do and why the whole bus was shaking, as if he had entered the wrong place. The young man looked out the window to see what was happening on the street. When I noticed a bright flash between the buildings, I had the feeling that an explosion had occurred from something unknown. Suddenly, the bus flipped over like a toy car from the blast wave, which was very powerful, and huge pieces of asphalt flew around. Ji Hyun did not understand what was happening at the time and simply closed his eyes in shock. When I felt that everything had calmed down, I dared to open my eyes and look around. The first thing he saw was the bus door, which showed that it was more dangerous outside than inside. The street was covered with smoke from the explosion. Roads and buildings were vandalized and all vehicles were scattered along the roadway. The bus Ji Hyun was in was lying upside down in the middle of the road with broken windows and doors. Many passengers were injured and could not get out of the iron can the bus turned into. Ji Hung was not unharmed either. His hands were cut by broken glass. The guy was trying to get up and recover from the accident he had been in. The young man could not understand the cause of the explosion and why the bus turned over. Ji Hyun felt that his whole body hurt like never before, and all the wounds he had gotten were aching painfully. The guy had a feeling that he had several fractures and decided to use his ability to massage on himself. The young man was not sure that he would be able to help himself because he did not know whether he would be able to massage himself as well as his colleagues. He immediately began to feel some changes in his body, so he was not going to stop because he still had hope for recovery. The wounds that had been opened immediately began to heal, and the painful sensations disappeared. Ji Hyun began to receive notifications that his physical and mental condition had begun to recover. After completing his massage, the young man received another notification that his skills had been upgraded. Ji Hyun finally regained consciousness and realized that there were many people on the bus who needed his help. He hurried to the passengers and began asking who was conscious and who needed help. He heard someone quietly asking for help from the side and immediately went there. But the man who called him pointed his finger forward and said that a man was badly injured and needed help first. Ji Hyun felt that it was his main mission now to help as many people as possible. The young man ran up to the victim and loudly and clearly asked him to calm down, even though he knew how much he was in pain. The guy examined the wounds, which were quite deep, and Ji Hyun was not sure whether he could cope with such difficulties, but he had no choice, so he began to massage. The young man was convinced that his massage was helping and continued to restore the man. Ji Hyun realized that he could provide first aid perfectly thanks to his skill. He did not stop to prevent the man from losing his life because his injuries were very serious. The guy's skill level has improved again, and he managed to save the victim and open a new attribute of first aid. Now, every time Ji-hyun uses the massage ability, first aid will be automatically applied. The man regained consciousness and thanked the guy for his help. None of the people around him understood what had happened, and Ji-hyun said that he thought there was an explosion nearby. Passengers began to say that they needed to get outside to get away as quickly as possible, but Ji-hyun, hearing that the men wanted to leave, stopped them and said that they could not go outside now. But one of the men didn't understand why they couldn't come out, because they had to call someone for help. Ji-hyun said that the new gate had probably opened, and now there could be monsters outside, so it was definitely safer on the bus. The man was stunned by this suggestion, but said that he should listen to the young man who was awakened. The man who thought that Ji-hyun was awakened was a little confused because no one knew that he was actually a hunter. Ji-hyun went to help those who still needed help when one of the people on the bus shouted that they were lucky to have an awakened person on the bus. The guy continued to do massage and again improved his skills and received new opportunities and bonuses. Suddenly, the young man realized that he had received a large number of likes just for helping others, and he was very surprised. Everyone present thanked Ji-hyun because they realized that without his help, many would not have survived. The passengers realized that they were incredibly lucky to have an awakened person on the bus with them. Ji-hyun was just helping people, and they thanked him as if he was doing something extraordinary. The guy was happy that the likes were pouring in, but still realized that there were still many wounded and he needed to help. In addition to adults, there were also children on the bus who needed urgent help. People did not spare their likes, and bonuses were coming to Ji-hyun more and more. At last, the guy could breathe out because he had helped everyone who needed it. The young man thought that he must have made a mistake to let everyone around him know that he was awakened or a hunter. Suddenly, Ji-hyun noticed his chest mini-camera and remembered that it usually turns on automatically when monsters are nearby. This fact confused the boy a bit, because it meant that the monsters had come to the surface and were somewhere nearby. Ji-hyun turned to the passengers and asked if anyone else needed help and heard that everyone was already fine and he managed to save everyone. People thanked the young man again, and Ji-hyun asked no one to leave while he went to check what was happening outside. Before he went out for the checkup, the guy told everyone that they should go to the hospital afterwards because he had just provided first aid. The passengers wished the young man good luck, and he went to check whether everyone was allowed to leave. Ji-hyun cautiously got off the bus and looked around to see if it was safe to be outside. The guy tried to gather all his will into a fist because he realized that the safety of ordinary citizens of the city now depends on him. The young man climbed out and looked around, observing the terrible consequences of the explosion. The roads were in cracks, traffic lights were lying on the floor, and all the wires were broken. Many mangled cars and buses lay on the road, buildings so destroyed that they were about to fall. A little boy stood in the middle of all this chaos and cried without feeling safe. Ji-hyun looked at all the horrors and even smelled the burned bodies that could not be saved. On top of that, everywhere there was a smell of gasoline leaking from the tanks of the cars that were badly damaged. Suddenly, he saw something ahead of him that drove him into great fear because he realized what it was. He saw a portal open and cause terror in the street. But that was not the end, because an even greater danger was approaching. Many monsters came out of this portal and were about to attack everyone and everything they saw in front of them. Ji-hyun looked at the scary creatures and realized that he had seen a few other monsters before, but these ones coming out of the portal were a little different. He did not understand why the gate opened in the middle of the city and not in the dungeon as usual. The young man watched as a bunch of monsters marched on the city like a plague of locusts that destroyed everything in their path. Ji-hyun managed to see and realize that the goblins were attacking, and now he had to urgently figure out what to do next. Chaos broke out on the street, with people moving chaotically in different directions trying to find shelter. Ji-hyun ran towards the monsters, hoping that his strength would be enough to wait for the hunters who had experience fighting such creatures. The young man realized that he was really an expert in inanimate monsters, but what to do with living ones, especially with so many of them, Ji-hyun really did not understand. Suddenly, the guy remembered that people in the bus were waiting for him, and they urgently needed to be rescued. He pulled himself together and began to recall everything he knew about goblins and how to defeat them and escape from them. Ji-hyun had no better idea than to get to the bus and warn everyone about what was coming. He ran to the entrance of the vehicle and immediately tried to reassure the passengers that they would not have to wait long for the hunters because the portal opened in the very center of the city. People looked at the guy in confusion, waiting for further instructions. Ji-hyun said that they should just run away from the place as soon as possible because the consequences could be disastrous. The young man waited for everyone to get out and start running away and decided that before the hunters arrived, he should try to stop the goblins. The guy looked at the monsters, which were growing in number every second, and realized that he had minimal chance of confronting them all alone. But mentally, he tried to calm himself down and said that now was definitely not the time to give up and cry. Ji-hyun opened a shop on the platform and wanted to quickly choose something that could help him in the confrontation. The guy bought a beginner's kit for himself, which contained several items that Ji-hyun could use in battle. The young man received a notification that he could use 2 skills at once during the battle. The basic set of equipment included a sword and a shield. In addition, Ji-hyun had an increased level of magical power, so he could try his hand at fighting goblins. Suddenly, a symbol of a plant began to appear above his head. These were two small leaves that symbolized the beginning of the journey. For Ji Heng, it was a sign of his new beginning as a hunter and meant that he was a beginner. Since this sign was constantly glowing above the young man's head, he felt quite humiliated to walk around with such a mark. After the last purchase, the guy decided to check how many bonuses he had left to buy something else useful. Ji Hyun checked his balance of likes and decided that he needed attack skills, and that strength was now a priority. And he decided to spend all his bonuses on strength, and his skill was developed to level D. Ji Hung's muscles began to grow before his eyes, and he immediately felt like he could move mountains. He decided to finish his shopping there because he was sure that what he bought in the store was more than enough to defeat the goblins. Ji Hyun went to meet the danger because he was ready both mentally and physically. Suddenly, he heard someone's voices and was very surprised that there were still people in the place, so he climbed up on the rubble to see where the voices were coming from. The boy saw a man and a little boy surrounded by goblins preparing to attack. Ji Hyun tried to assess the situation and how he should act so as not to endanger the man and the child even more, since there were 3 goblins. The young man was not sure that he would succeed, but he had to try to save innocent people. He shouted loudly, drawing the monster's attention to him, making it clear that they would have to overcome him first. Ji Hyun was certainly afraid, but he hoped that his equipment would still help him. The goblins immediately began to attack the boy, and the young man managed to repel the attack with his shield. From above, the goblins were flying at the young man one by one, using sharp blades to try to take Ji Hyun's life. He managed to fight back time and time again, but such attacks were quite unexpected for a guy who had no experience in fighting monsters. One of the goblins decided to jump on the young man because other weapons did not help, and he was sure that the boy would not be able to resist them for long. For a second, Ji Hyun was confused because he did not expect a close fight to start so quickly. The boy pulled himself together in time to protect himself with a shield from the goblin's attack. At that moment, he was very surprised and did not even suspect that he could fight so well because he had never had to fight anyone before. He was glad that he was able to repel all the monster's attacks well, as if the young man had been doing it all his life. Ji Hyun thought that his skills were related to the fact that his powers were increased. Inspired by his new skills in defense, the guy decided to go on the attack because he had no choice. The young man was confident in his actions and desperately rushed at the goblin with a weapon in his hands. He easily managed to defeat one of the monsters by destroying it to the ground. Ji Hyun landed successfully and was ready to deal with the next 2 goblins who wanted to take the boy's life. The young man stood up confidently, showing the horrible creatures that they would suffer the same fate as their friend. The goblins definitely didn't expect this turn of events because they were facing an ordinary newcomer. The man and the child looked at Ji Hyun as their savior, and they had hope that they would be able to get out of this situation almost unscathed. The boy was more confident and full of energy than ever, holding his sword and shield firmly in his hands. The young man could not understand why he was so calm and not at all worried during the battle. Ji Hyun realized that his mind was clear and not occupied by any unnecessary thoughts that usually fill his head. The guy was happy that his purchase of the beginner's package was not in vain, but rather helped him a lot. At once, 2 goblins decided to get rid of the hunter who prevented them from moving on and doing what they had planned. Ji Hyun already knew how to fight 1 monster, but not 2 at the same time. The young man immediately came up with a plan of action to save him and allow him to deal with the monsters one by one. One of the goblins was constantly flying at the shield, launched by the boy to restrain one of the monsters. While one goblin was trying to dodge the shield, the other was already near Ji Hyun and was preparing to harm the young man. The monster was sure that the boy would not be able to get out of this fight alive because it is difficult to resist 2 alone. The sword of Ji Hung and the goblin collided, making a characteristic sound of metal friction that turned everything upside down. But the guy did not intend to give up and pushed the monster away from him with all his might to give himself the opportunity to deal an irreparable blow to the enemy. The young man knew he would succeed because the skills he had acquired had given him confidence and endurance. Ji Hyun found the fight quite easy, so he didn't have much time left to win. Weapons came together again and again in a battle, with sparks flying in all directions from the friction of the iron. The boy fought desperately with the goblins, feeling that very soon this battle would end. The young man was tired of using only brute physical force, so he decided to try to add a little magic to his first ever fight. Ji Hyun began to move so fast that the goblin simply did not even have time to watch the boy's movements. Suddenly, the young man stopped, which completely confused his opponent, who could not respond to Ji Hyun. The goblin, which had been restrained by a powerful blow from the shield, just sat helplessly on the floor and watched the boy's incredible skill. Ji Hyun looked directly into the eyes of his opponent and said only one phrase, that it was time to say goodbye to his life. And he immediately pointed his sword at the goblin, not giving it a chance to escape or try to attack back. Ji Hung threw his sword with all his might right at the goblin, as if he were using a spear that struck the monster dead. The body of the lifeless monster fell to the ground, frightening the man and child whom the boy was protecting. Finally, the young man could be distracted because he had managed to deal with 3 goblins alone, and these 3 certainly did not threaten anyone. Ji Hyun calmly approached one of the monsters, contemplating the fruits of his labor. He took his sword, which was sticking out of the goblin's body, and pulled it out in one motion, as if it was not the first time he had done this. He thought that he had done quite well for his first such experience. The young man began to receive notifications that his sword's properties had improved and that he was receiving likes. The notifications didn't stop, and Ji Hyun was very surprised that he managed to collect a large number of bonuses after defeating only 3 monsters. People started coming out to the street, calling the young man a hunter and sincerely thanking him for saving them. The man Ji Hyun saved came up to him and said that the boy had saved his life and the child's life, and the young man only said that everyone should hurry up and get away from this place as far as possible. Ji Hyun didn't quite understand what was going on and why the likes notifications on the platform kept coming. He still didn't understand the rules by which he could receive these bonuses. And the likes did not stop, and their number only grew with each passing second. Ji Hyun decided to deal with this bonus system later and went to battle with the other goblins, of which there were quite a few left. In the course of the battle, the guy began to realize that by destroying these monsters, he would not be able to improve his skills, and only likes could raise his level. But the boy did not stop, and wanted to destroy as many monsters as possible, because they threatened all of humanity. And he could get likes from ordinary people who watched him and approved of his actions. Ji Hyun stopped for a moment and tried to get all the unnecessary thoughts out of his head, because the monsters had to be defeated. He realized that at any moment, he could lose his concentration and vigilance and lose his life. While all the goblins that were near the boy were defeated, Ji Hyun had a little time to rest. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the guy immediately went to the store on the platform and began to choose improvements that could help. He asked for the magic skills he could afford so that he wouldn't have to spend time searching through the many offers. There was only one option for magic skills, Magic Scream, and the young man bought it without hesitation and asked to see something else on the likes he had left. The search result was quite voluminous, and Ji Hyun didn't have time to search for exactly what he needed, so he decided that he needed something with instant activation. This time, there was also only one option left, flying arrows, and the boy immediately acquired this skill. Ji Hyun's balance was now at 0, but the new capabilities should have made his opposition much easier. The guy did not know for sure whether his purchases would help him, but he had to activate them immediately. He reached for the activation button and pressed it, expecting a change in himself and his weapon. The changes were not long in coming, and the guy began to experience strange changes again. Now the young man was armed with a whole new set of skills to try out. He took in a full lungful of air to test his magical abilities, and it was a magical scream. With all his might, Ji Hyun screamed. But it was not just a voice, it was magic, the concentration of which definitely increased in the boy's body. Powerful waves began to spread from the young man, repelling all the creatures that wanted to harm Ji Hyun. The waves were so strong that they demolished everything in their path. After this cry, all the goblins who were nearby paid attention to the boy, realizing that there was someone alive there. The monsters rushed en masse toward Ji Hyun, wanting to take his life. There were so many of them that he did not expect it, and was not quite sure of his abilities. Ji Hyun couldn't think of what to do in this situation because he wasn't going to lure so many monsters. The guy dropped the shield on the floor and decided to try the next novelty he bought for likes. The young man closed his eyes and concentrated hard on what he wanted to do and what result he expected. He raised his hands in the air, and magical arrows flew in the direction of the attackers in large numbers. With a single push of his hands, Ji Hyun managed to send an army of arrows at the monsters. The goblins did not stop, as if they did not notice the obstacles in the form of magic arrows used by the boy. Their zeal was boundless. They were not afraid of anything, and were definitely not going to stop until they destroyed the guy. But such stubbornness was in vain because Ji Hyun's magical abilities left the goblins no chance of survival. The guy was looking at the result of his attack, which was simply unsurpassed. All the enemies were instantly killed. He was looking into the distance to see if everyone was defeated or if there were any more left. Suddenly, Ji Hyun's head seemed to be struck by lightning with unrealistic force. The guy grabbed his head and could not understand what was happening and why he was in such unbearable pain. This was the price for using magic to save the young man's life. The platform began to receive a flood of likes again, and the number of likes only grew as all the residents of the city were impressed by Ji Hyun's actions. The piercing pain in his head seemed to start leaving his body, and he could gradually regain consciousness. The young man did not want to stop there and immediately spent half of the likes he received on magical abilities. The rank of his magical abilities was increased, and the pain completely left him, which he was very happy about. Finally, 2 teams of hunters were almost there, while all the others were on rescue operations and could not join. Several helicopters were approaching the opening of the portal, through which all the evil spirits were climbing. They were approaching the target with only 5 minutes left, and the hunters were preparing to descend. All the hunters finally received the signal that it was safe to start the cleanup and they could go down to the site. While Ji Hyun waited for help, he had to hold back the invasion of monsters, which never ended. There were so many of them. The guy fought alone and could not wait for help because his strength was already on the limit. During the battle, the young man even had time to think about whether he would be paid for holding back the goblins for several minutes on his own. But Ji Hyun had no choice, because he had to endure this battle and defeat the monsters who wanted to get rid of him. The boy's fight continued, and he held on with his last strength because there were only more goblins. Finally, the young man waited for help and heard that the hunters were about to arrive. But suddenly, he noticed something he hadn't expected to see with his own eyes. Not goblins, but orcs, who were one rank higher than the previous ones, began to emerge from the portal. Ji Hyun had seen undead orcs before, but he still didn't expect them to be so large. The orcs destroyed everything in their path without making much effort, and their blows shattered everything into small crumbs. Now Ji Hyun had to confront not only goblins, but also orcs, whose number was growing. He was worried that humanity was still in danger, and he hadn't noticed the hunters' help. Yet, to Ji Hyun's luck, they were already right over his head, preparing to fight to stop the evil. The guy was as excited as a little kid who saw a superhero for the first time, and it was understandable because for the last few hours, he had been fighting alone for the first time in his life. The hunters were on their way to defeat a lot of monsters. Each of them looked very powerful and confident because they realized that they were superheroes for the whole humanity. Their talents and skills were very different, but all of the effective hunters were professionals in their field. The strength they always demonstrated was simply mesmerizing and left no city resident indifferent. While still in flight, the hunters began to attack orcs and goblins, preventing them from retaliating. Explosions and screams of monsters could be heard in different corners of the street, where an incredible number of them had gathered. Ji Hyun covered himself with his shield to save himself from the flying debris and was sincerely surprised at how quickly the hunters dealt with the monsters. The smoke from the hunters' attacks gradually began to dissipate, and they could safely come out of their shelters. The street was covered with thousands of bodies of goblins and orcs who were unlucky enough to survive the battle. Ambulances began to arrive at the scene, and people came to them for help, or just to be examined. People whom Ji Hyun had saved began to approach him and offer him money as a sign of gratitude, but the young man could not accept it because he was just helping. The guy told the couple who offered the money that they should just be happy that everyone was alive and to go to the hospital to make sure everything was okay. People thanked the young man, and new likes were added for their sincere emotions of gratitude to Ji Hyun. There were so many people who wanted to thank him that he could not physically listen to everyone. One of the civil servants was incredibly impressed by the young man's dedication to protecting people. The man continued to say that if not for Ji Hyun, there would have been many more innocent victims. The civil servant was embarrassed during the conversation with Ji Hyun because he knew that the next day officials would say that there were only a few victims. The man was delighted with the work that the young man had done and helped the whole city. He opened the guy's personal card on the tablet, where it was indicated that he was a newcomer, and this surprised the man. The civil servant continued to study the information about Ji Hyun and found that the young man could participate in both close and long-range combat. The man added that this is a rather rare feature for a hunter and that they are very rare. The civil servant said that the young man could go home and rest and not worry about the bodies of the monsters, and that he would be paid for his work in the near future. In addition to the promised monetary reward, Ji Hyun once again received likes from the townspeople who were simply delighted with the boy. After talking to the civil servant, Ji Hyun began to realize that he was not an assistant hunter, but a full-fledged hunter, which made the young man very happy. After a hard and eventful day, Ji Hyun finally returned to his apartment and could have a good rest. He fell on the bed because he was exhausted and could not relax his muscles and his brain, which had been working continuously for the last hours. The events that the guy had to go through did not fit in his head. The whole battle in which he participated was like a dream. The young man replayed the moments of the battle and could not believe that he had fought monsters alone and destroyed so many goblins. He received a notification on the platform, and now he could read all the updates that had happened before. The message said that Ji Hyun could upload videos from his chest mini camera and get even more bonuses and improve his skill level. Ji Hyun took out his mini camera, but didn't understand how to upload the video to earn even more likes. The platform showed detailed instructions to the young man, and a window appeared in front of him where he had to place a camera to read the information. Ji Hyun didn't know much about technology and wasn't sure if he would succeed, but he decided to follow the platform's prompts. He was very tired, so he wanted to finish uploading the video and finally go to bed to rest. While all the information was downloaded, the young man fell asleep because he was exhausted from this crazy day. Ji Hyun had a dream about him and his grandfather. The man was running headlong with a baby in his arms. The grandfather asked the boy to wait a little longer and be patient because they were almost there. After a short time, they arrived at the hospital where the grandfather was in such a hurry. The boy could hardly speak because he was very sick, and his grandfather was trying to get to the doctor as soon as possible. The young man's grandfather said that as soon as the fever subsided, he would buy him ice cream so that the boy would be motivated to recover as soon as possible. But it did not help much because the disease made itself felt, and the child could not keep his emotions in check. It didn't take long for a doctor to come up to them and give them an antipyretic injection to help the child. The boy cried for a while, and his condition began to return to normal. The grandfather immediately kept his promise and bought the young man an ice cream to cheer him up for a while. The boy was glad to have a sweet sedative and that his grandfather's promise had been kept. The grandfather stood by the boy and asked him not to rush to eat, so as not to catch a cold even more. They sat on a bench together, and the grandfather could no longer worry about the boy because the danger to his health was over. The last words that his grandfather said were an instruction that the boy should grow up healthy and strong, and Ji-hyun promised him that he would. At this point, the young man began to wake up because he was awakened by a phone call. Ji-hyun reached out without opening his eyes and took out his cell phone to answer the call. The other side of the phone began to say something that the young man could not understand. So he had to get up and listen to the information that said that since yesterday, all the TV channels had been talking about him. Ji-hyun did not believe what was being said about him on all the news channels and decided not to trust it, but to check it out for himself. He hung up the phone and picked up the TV remote to turn it on. On the first channel, he saw video footage of a young man fighting with pigeons on the street yesterday. Ji-hyun couldn't believe his eyes. Even though the quality of the video was not the best, he could easily recognize the young man's face. He was stunned by what he saw and still could not believe that this was happening to him. The report said that all the rescued people only talked about the unknown hunter who saved them. According to rumors, this hunter had 3 healing powers at once: physical and magical attacks. The TV presenter emphasized that they had learned that the guy had not yet received a reward for his work, but that the management already knew about the hero, but did not disclose his name. It also became known that the footage from the video that was uploaded at night on the platform of hunters with the participation of an unknown hero is breaking all possible ratings. The TV screen showed excerpts of video from the boy's chest mini camera, which he uploaded to the network. The TV hosts wanted to give the hero maximum coverage so that all the city's residents would know him by sight and understand who they should thank. Ji-hyun looked at the video and wondered if these fragments were from his camera, and if so, it meant that he had managed to upload the video to the platform. He thought that this video was likely to gain views and most likely likes all night. Ji-hyun decided to check it out and opened the platform's menu to make sure the video was available for viewing. As soon as the system booted up, the young man saw that he had more than 1,000 unread messages. The guy couldn't believe his eyes that his first ever fight was gaining huge coverage in such a short period of time. When it came to checking the likes, the screen showed a figure of 87,000. Ji-hyun was simply speechless. His popularity grew at the speed of light. Overnight, many people subscribed to the guy to be able to follow his account and updates. The guy did not fully realize what had happened to him and did not understand whether it should be so, that there were more views than likes, and what it meant. He also found an explanation on the platform that only likes and subscriptions affect bonuses, and views are just views. Ji-hyun couldn't understand how so many people could pay attention to him because he thought he was doing nothing special, just helping people. He fell on the bed and thought that it was just a dream to become incredibly popular in the world, so unexpectedly. The young man thought he had just gone to bed in the evening and woke up as a star. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, but the guy was not expecting anyone to visit. He got out of bed and headed for the door, wondering who it could be. He came up and asked who was there, expecting someone from his family or friends. The guy heard that it was his own door and asked to open it, and it seemed that Ji-hyun was not expecting such a guest. He hesitantly opened the door and invited the visitor inside. The young man was visited by the new director of the company where Ji-hyun worked. The TV was still working, and they started telling interesting details about the appearance of the gate that appeared right in the center of the city. The hosts said that the emergence of new portals is still being determined, but there are still ways to create safe conditions for the public, such as the use of barrier boards. But the problem was that the funding for their purchase was constantly decreasing, and we needed to find an alternative. However, given the current situation, we cannot rule out the possibility of a new portal that may reappear on the streets. So, barrier walls are unavoidable. The only problem is that they are quite rare, and not all countries can afford them. But there is still an option to go in search of such shields that can be found in the dungeons of the 3rd and 4th levels. But hunters with high skill who could fight in a 4th level dungeon were very few in number, practically counted on the fingers of one hand. So the TV hosts concluded that barrier shields are a vital necessity now. But where to look for highly skilled hunters remains an open question. After Ji-hyun opened the door, he became very nervous. He never expected the director himself to visit him. The guy immediately asked his boss to wait because he couldn't invite him into a room that was a mess. The young man quickly began to rake up all the dirty things that were out of place. He threw everything into the laundry basket and hid it by pushing it under the couch with his foot. Ji-hyun was embarrassed to the director that his place was so messy because he wasn't expecting guests. The director told the young man not to worry because he had come on business and had time to drop by for a small gift. The guy accepted the gift and was already thinking about what urgent business his director might have for him. The man stood there looking at Ji-hyun's apartment as if to assess his design skills, and he immediately realized that he could just imagine the place where the boy lived. He received a notification on the platform that the director admired the young man and gave him 1 like, and Ji-hyun immediately thought that he was rather stingy with compliments. Ji-hyun invited his boss to come into the room and sit on the couch. He went to the kitchen to get something to drink while we talked. At this time, the announcer went into the living room and sat down on the couch, preparing for an important conversation with the young man. Ji-heng was surprised that Lycus appeared in the name of the director, even though he would have been an unknown citizen before. At that time, the news was on TV, and the director of the company was on the screen, and he turned out to be a hunter as well. The journalists asked him about dungeons and monsters, and noted that his subordinate had fortunately arrived at the scene on time. But the hunter said that it was not his subordinate, and he knew nothing about him. The journalists were very surprised by this answer because the new hero was brave and talented, so everyone thought that the young man belonged to a group of hunters who saved the city. But the director did not know what to say to the journalists because it was the first time he had heard of this unknown hero. So the director decided to start a conversation with the boy about his talent and the fact that he had become a hunter. The man said that in the morning he heard quite interesting news that did not leave him indifferent. Ji-hyun handed his boss a glass of drink and wanted to say something, but the director continued his thought. The man said that he never thought that the hunter's assistant could become awakened, and he was sincerely impressed by his actions during the monster's attack. Ji-hyun began to feel ashamed and said that if it wasn't for the hunters, he would not be alive. But the director focused and told the young man that he had come to offer him something. The guy was surprised and did not understand what this offer could be. The director said that he used to be a hunter's assistant, and now that he had become awakened, he wondered if he wanted to become a hunter himself. Ji-hyun did not expect such a question because he could not even imagine that he would receive an offer to become a hunter. The director immediately offered to sign a cooperation agreement with him. The guy did not believe that all this was really happening to him. He could not believe that he could just sign a contract and officially become a monster hunter. For a few seconds, the young man simply fell through time and space, trying to believe that this conversation was serious. Ji-hyun looked at the director and said that he was so confused that he didn't even know what to say to him. The man understood the young man's emotions and said that he would explain everything in more detail. The guy was so excited that it seemed his heart was going to jump out of his chest, but he tried not to show his state. Ji-hyun said that it was a great honor to receive such an offer and asked the director to think again whether he really wanted to accept the guy into his team. But the man did not understand why the young man underestimated himself so much, since he had a great talent. The director told the young man that they would think about it together, and in the meantime, the man would help him believe in himself. He looked at Ji-heng carefully to make him realize that the offer was more than real. But at that moment, the young man began to receive notifications on the platform that they were trying to press him and check the veracity of his words. Ji-hyun had never heard of the lying skill before in his life and did not understand how it worked and how he could protect himself in this situation. The boy realized that this skill could help him recognize whether the other person was telling the truth or a lie. The young man immediately decided to use his skills as a beginner, and his mind was completely free of thoughts so that no one could read them. Ji-hyun was not able to resist because his rank was much lower than the director's. The man put the drink on the counter and said he understood his doubts about the contract. He added that he really liked the guy and that he had good skills and talent for the job. Ji-hyun could not understand why the director was trying so hard to persuade him to work together. The guy felt that something was wrong, but he didn't know what it was and didn't know what to say. But the director did not give up and continued to persuade the young man, saying that hunters with combined skills like Ji-heng's were very rare, and such hunters are highly valued, so the director promised to create all the conditions for the young man if he signed a contract. Ji-hyun still wasn't sure about his answer, so he asked for more details. And the director again used the skill of verifying the truthfulness of words on the boy, and everything he had said earlier turned out to be true. So now he was more confident in convincing the young man that this offer was very beneficial for him. He added that there was something the boy should know, and Ji-hyun immediately wondered what it was that his boss hadn't told him yet. The director told the young man that the contract was for 20 billion for 5 years and asked him if he was satisfied with the offer. The guy was shocked by the amount of his salary and read further the terms and conditions, which stated that he had to participate in battles twice a month on behalf of the company. The director said that of course he could sign a contract for 9 years right away and waited for Ji-heng's response. The guy was hesitating because the amount was so large that he could not even imagine in his dreams that he would have such a fortune. The young man mentally shouted with joy that he had just hit the jackpot. But he was stopped by the fact that no one would pay such a lot of money under such miserable conditions, so there was an undercurrent somewhere. The director insisted more and more and said that the boy could also expect financial support for his younger brother, who was studying law. The man knew that Ji-hyun had to drop out of college and go to work to survive with his brother, and it scared him that everything was known about him. In addition to everything that was offered earlier, the young man could also have a personal assistant. Ji-hyun said uncertainly that he usually liked such conditions, and the director immediately realized that the guy agreed to cooperate and sign a contract. The young man still did not understand whether all this was really happening to him or whether he was dreaming. He realized that in just one day, his life had turned upside down. Ji-hyun thought that he would most likely be regularly shown on television now, and what the director offers him is more than just good conditions, especially with such a salary. The director could not stand the guy's long silence and said that he understood how much he had to deal with in one day. He advised me to think carefully before answering, because not every day and not everyone is lucky enough to receive such an offer. Ji-hyun apologized to the director and said that he did not understand what to do. But the director replied that he shouldn't worry about anything because everything had already been decided and only his consent was needed. He added that this is why he came to him so early, because they have very little time. This surprised him and made him doubt whether he should agree or not. The young man reflected and knew for sure that he would not get a second chance in his life. Ji-hyun agreed to sign the contract, and the director said that as soon as everything was ready, he would notify the young man. They shook hands and said goodbye before all the formalities were completed. The director left, and the door to Ji-hyun's apartment closed. Now he could try to put his thoughts in order. He breathed a sigh of relief because a very important decision in his life had been made. Finally, the guy was left alone and could enjoy the silence in his apartment. The boy immediately recalled his grandfather's instructions that a young man should become happy, and Ji-hyun wondered if what happened to him could be considered happiness. A few days passed before the guy was invited to a meeting about the contract. The venue of the event was a dormitory auditorium. The meeting was quite serious, and there were guards at the door to prevent unpleasant situations that could occur. Many companies showed interest in the boy's personality, and everyone wanted him to agree to cooperate with them. On stage, Ji-hyun was sitting at a table and the director was behind the podium. Everyone understood that the young man was unique and that the simultaneous use of different skills was very rare. Representatives of various companies knew that the boy could become one of the best hunters, because even as a beginner, he demonstrated great skill. With only half an hour left in the conference, all the representatives of the companies tried to learn as much information about the young man as possible. A girl who was a manager of a company named Choi Hyun-jin read the correspondence of the managers of the company where she worked, who decided whether Ji-hyun was really a good hunter. They realized that they needed to lure the boy to their team because his skills could raise the authority of the company where he would work. And now she had to find something to lure Ji-hyun to her side. She knew that if she couldn't come to an agreement with him, she would have problems with her bosses. She looked at the representatives of the other companies who were constantly looking for something. She looked around and realized that 10 years of her work could not be lost, so she had to come up with something. The stage director announced that there were 10 minutes left and asked everyone to get ready. The men from the other companies said that their manager ordered them to do everything to keep Ji-hyun working for them. But the other asked how they should do it, because they need to offer something that others cannot. Choi Hyun-jin began to think of ways to fight for the boy's affection, because the competition was incredible. The girl decided to summarize everything she knew about Ji-hyun to find something he couldn't refuse. She knew that he had a brother who was studying law, and he worked as a hunter's assistant to pay for his brother's education. Choi Hyun-jin looked at the young man and saw nothing interesting in his past life. She thought it would be easy to lure him by offering a decent salary. The girl came across the guy's profile on a dating site and was upset that Ji-hyun was not dating anyone because his appearance was attractive. Choi Hyun-jin decided that she would improvise, and the director declared the meeting over and offered to summarize the results. The man suggested starting with the group representing Daekhon. The girl was a representative of this particular team, and the responsibility she had was a bit depressing. She picked up the microphone and prepared a speech to convince Ji-hyun to give Daehong a chance. Choi Hyun-jin gathered her thoughts and began to speak. First, the girl said hello and said she was glad to meet the young man. Then she introduced herself and said that her name was Hyun-jin and she was a manager of the Daehong group. Hyun-jin said that there was not much time to prepare, but she tried to do her best to make the conditions suitable, and Ji-hyun immediately thought that he had heard this before. The director stood silently behind the podium, waiting to see what the girl had to offer. Hyun-jin started saying that their company was offering $40 billion and a 5-year contract, plus 85% of the spoils. Representatives of other companies were simply shocked by this offer, as it was almost impossible to beat such a rate without leaving the company bankrupt. The girl also said that they would provide a comfortable life for the young man and his brother and would pay for their education. Hyun-ji could not believe his ears. The guy did not understand how a company that knew nothing about him could simply double the amount of money. It seemed crazy to him. Choi Hyun-jin looked at the boy and waited for him to say something. But Ji-hyun was in no hurry to jump to conclusions and wanted to understand for himself why he was so important. The girl added that Daehon is a construction company, so the house they will offer Ji-hyun will be completely new, and with all the amenities. The boy's eyes widened even more with every word Hyun-jin said in incredible surprise. She said that housing from their company in the city is considered the most elite and best of all possible options. Hyun-jin looked at the confused boy and realized that if the young man moved into one of the company's apartments, the prices of the others could rise significantly and bring in a large profit. She was pleased with herself because she had found really good leverage over the guy, and hardly anyone would dare to outdo such an offer. The girl was already mentally celebrating her victory because everyone present was just silent. The man behind the podium patiently listened to all the suggestions for Ji-hyun and did not know if he could convince the young man to stay with him. The audience gradually began to hear proposals from other companies that were non-standard and quite interesting. Ji-hyun listened carefully to everyone and selected the 4 best proposals for himself, among which he had to choose only one. Suddenly, his thoughts were overwhelmed, and he could not understand what he was doing, because he did not even know anything about his capabilities and skills. He thought that perhaps he had imagined too much about himself when he woke up, or simply caught starstruck. But he didn't have time for long deliberations, and he had to make a decision. Ji-hyun was well aware that all his life he had been recycling monsters' bodies, and in one moment, he had become a hero for many people, and it was really hard to cope with. The last company to make a proposal was Chonhee, and the man began to say that indeed all the proposals from the companies were quite good. He added that he understands how long they have been thinking about them, and he has no doubt that they are all really beautiful. Ji-hyun did not quite understand what the director was getting at and continued to listen in silence. The man went to the bank and offered 80 billion and a stone that awakens B-rank abilities. The guy was so surprised to be offered such a lot of money and a stone that he could not say a word. The stone offered by the director was very rare and could turn an ordinary person into an awakened one. The man looked at the representatives of the other companies and asked if anyone would dare to offer more to lure the newcomer to their side. The girl was furious because she knew that 2 awakening stones were found last year by their company. The director noted that the Stone of Awakening could be sold for 20 billion, and then he turned to Ji-hyun, offering not to sell him, but to use him to awaken his brother. But this offer only frightened the boy because he was worried about the future of his brother, who was the closest thing to him. The guy was losing control of the situation, so we had to do something urgently. The young man's mind was a mess. He could not make a single right decision and choose one of the companies. The director turned to the young man and said that everyone understood that it was extremely difficult for him to make a decision so quickly. So he suggested that the guy take some time to think about it, during which time the company would summarize all the proposals and prepare a contract. Hyunjin was obviously not feeling very well because she hadn't slept for several days and needed to rest. The girl looked at Ji-hyun and then at the director and wondered where he could have gotten the stone he offered the young man. The director saw that the boy was confused and asked him if he was okay. Ji-hyun looked up and said that he was fine, just trying to collect his thoughts. The young man said he thought it was right to consult his brother before giving a final answer. The director supported him because he understood that the boy needed time to think. Choi Hyun-jin left the room and was upset because she realized that Jeonhee's company had offered more and that Ji-hyun would most likely choose their offer. Later, Ji-hyun and his brother met with the director to review the contract. The young man's brother warned the man that if he did not provide the Awakening Stone, the contract would be cancelled, so they had to discuss compensation. The principal got a little nervous and told Ji-hyun that his brother was not studying law for nothing. The man assured the boys that they would receive the stone on time and not to have any doubts, and asked if they had any suggestions for the contract. The director waited for Ji-hyun's brother to finish reading the contract and said that he would like him to become a hunter in their company. But Ji-hyun pretended not to understand what we were talking about because his brother was doing something he liked. The boy's brother asked the director about the 4th point and asked what it meant. The man assured the boys that this clause is usually present in all contracts for newcomers and asked if they wanted to change anything. But the young man said that he did not want to change anything. He just had to understand what this paragraph meant. Ji-hyun began to miss this long discussion because he realized that the meeting could drag on for a long time. 2 hours later, the boys were released, and Ji-hyun asked if his brother really wanted to use the stone, since it could be sold for at least 8 billion. But his brother said that this stone rightfully belonged to Ji-hyun, but if he didn't mind, he would like to use it, because the young man no longer needed it. The guy confirmed that this stone is absolutely useless for those who have awakened. And my brother said that this means that there is no reason to refuse him, because they are a family and will go hunting together. Ji-hyun looked at his little brother and realized how much he had grown up. And there's no arguing about whether to use an awakening stone. After a while, the guys met with the director again and the contract was ready to be signed, so the man suggested that they reread the document. The guys were shocked by the size of the contract because it was so thick. Ji-hyun's brother did not like this suggestion very much, but if it was to help the young man, he agreed to read it all over. The guy started reading, but it was very slow, and the director tried to convince Ji-hyun that he had nothing to lose by signing the contract. Ji-hyun made a sharp decision and signed all the documents that needed to be signed. With relief, he put the pen down on the table, because now he had made his choice and it was impossible to go back. In his head, he had only the information that he would sign a contract and receive 80 billion and a wake-up call. And the guy's brother still couldn't make a decision because some clauses of the contract scared him. But the director tried to persuade the young man to agree to cooperate by throwing compliments at Ji-hyun's brother. Nevertheless, the decision was made and the second signature appeared on the papers. The director congratulated the guys on their decision and wished them success in their future work. But the man had something else for the boys, so he had to detain them for a few more minutes. He handed the box to the boys and told them to open it when they got home. Ji-hyun didn't understand what it was and asked if it was a gift or something else, but the man didn't answer. The guys went outside where Choi Hyun-jin, the manager of the company Daehong, was waiting for them and said she had something to discuss with Ji-hyun. The guy said that he had already signed a contract with the Chonhee group, but the girl said that's not what she wanted to talk about. Ji-hyun's brother stepped aside to avoid interrupting the conversation and waited for the boy nearby. The girl began to tell the young man that the Chonhee group was not the right company to get involved with. It was just that one phrase did not suit the guy, and he asked why the girl thought so. Choi Hyun-jin wonders how she should answer the question so as not to scare the young man. She told him that the company's situation was unstable and it would not be easy for him to work there. The girl added that the director, whose name was Jung Ji-han, was a rather ambiguous personality, and that he was called a maniac in the company and disowned by his relatives. Ji-hyun had indeed heard things about the director, but he thought it was just gossip. Hyun-jin asked him if he had heard of the heirs to the chairman before, and he said yes, and she immediately asked if Ji-han's name was among them. Ji-hyun had never really heard of him, and Hyun-jin added that he had come out of nowhere and started running the company. She tried to make the guy think that the director was not legitimate and that something was not right in the whole situation. Ji-hyun was a little scared that he was in a bad situation and didn't understand why the girl told him about it so late. Choi Hyun-jin apologized for taking up the boy's time and asked him to forget everything she had said, but the young man was sure that he would not be able to forget. As she said goodbye, the girl handed him her business card with her phone number. She told him to call her if the terms of his contract were violated, and that the doors of the Daehan group were always open to him. Ji-hyun was shocked by the information he received and did not understand what to do with it all now. The girl walked away and the guy watched her go, unable to say a word. Ji-hyun suggested that his brother rest a bit, and the boy replied that they could go nearby to eat rice. The young man's brother asked what they had talked about with this lady, and Ji-hyun did not elaborate and said that she had just given him her business card, and the guy was sincerely surprised by the girl's persistence in luring Ji-hyun to her company. Ji-hyun looked up at the Chonhee company building and wondered if what Hyun-jin had said was true. Still, I tried to reassure myself that the director did not look suspicious, so it was probably not true. So he didn't know who he should believe and who he shouldn't, because they all had their own reasons for slandering each other. The boys came to a cafe and ordered food, and my brother told Ji-hyun that he wanted to quit school. Ji-hyun started yelling at his brother that he was crazy, to just give up everything. But the guy calmly told his brother not to yell at him with a mouthful of food, and added that he now has great opportunities. And he doesn't want to waste time, but Ji-hyun said that he dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and the young man replied that it was before, and now he just wants to live life enjoying it. But Ji-hyun was furious, because he believed that the boy could lose what he had been achieving for many years. And my brother said that it was easy for him to talk about it now because his life changed instantly for the better. And Ji-hyun, having calmed down, decided to change the subject and said that it was better to think carefully about awakening. My brother agreed and said that there was still plenty of time to resolve all the issues. And in the future, if someone offers Ji-hyun any contracts, don't agree to anything without him. Ji-hyun returned home and decided to look up information about his director. He found out that Jung Ji-han's father was the fourth son of the company's chairman. The three older children had achieved success on their own, and there was a lot of information about them, but there was almost nothing about Ji-han's father. After a short search, the information was found. But nothing good was written about him, only that he had lost a lot of money and had a drunken car accident, and that was it. This seemed strange to the young man, and he began to wonder whether they were really hiding anything. All of his older brothers had an arranged marriage, and he was the only one who differed from his older brothers. Ji-hyun assumed that this was the reason why the chairman abandoned him. He began to think that it's not very nice to be popular, because everyone else will be talking about you. Suddenly, the young man found information that confirmed Choi Hyun-jin's words. And it was hard for the guy to believe, but the director really looked at him very strangely during the first meeting. Ji-hyun didn't know what to think, so he just put the phone down and tried to distract himself with something else. The young man's gaze went to the table where there was a small box with a gift from Ji-han, which he asked to open at home. The guy knew that they were supposed to receive the Awakening Stone in a week, so he had no idea what was in the box. Ji-hyun thought that there was something inside that was left after the gates with the goblins and orcs were closed. The guy opened the box and was very surprised by the object that was there. It was a wristwatch, an ordinary watch that was no different from any other existing watch. Still, he hoped that it was not an ordinary watch because it could not be an ordinary watch. Ji-hyun remembered that he had new likes and decided to log on to the platform to learn some new skills. He realized that bonuses were very important if he wanted to become a hunter, even though he could find something interesting in the dungeon. The guy opened the menu and noticed that the design had changed, and there were more skills available to him. The young man realized that with his abilities, the skill activation should take no more than 10 seconds, so he started looking for what he needed. But the search was not as easy as usual, and he had to choose the skills that suited him best. Ji-hung found the Sage's Eye skill and was very surprised that it was so expensive, 100,000 bonuses. The young man had only 108,000 on his balance sheet, so he had to make the right decision whether he needed this particular skill for the battle. The guy needed to buy something to protect and restore himself, so he could not spend so much money, and asked to find a similar skill, but cheaper. and the platform found only one option to replace the all-seeing eye, and it cost only 1,580 bonuses. Ji Hyun was delighted with this discovery and rushed to purchase the property for himself. He looked at the screen, trying to understand how his new skill worked. The guy quickly read the instructions and understood how to use his purchase. Now, it was time to test the skill on an object. All you had to do was focus on something, and you could get all the information about the thing. The guy immediately realized which item he wanted to test, because there was only one thing in his apartment about which he did not have reliable information. It was a gift from Ji-han, a watch the young man focused on, and everything worked out on the platform. Full information about this thing appeared. The watch was created in another dimension and was precise, durable, and waterproof. The young man could swim in it with confidence. But they had no magical properties, which made Ji-hyun very upset. But a gift is a gift, and the young man decided that he would wear them just for beauty. The guy looked at the watch he had read about and accepted that it was an artifact from another dimension. Ji-hyun thought it was very strange that they had a picture of a rabbit on the dial, but he didn't dwell on it and decided to open the status window on the platform. After the young man acquired the all-seeing eye skill, he immediately received several bonuses for quickly figuring out how to use it. Ji-hyun realized that this eye was of little use at such a low level, so he needed to improve this skill over time. He was not interested in just looking at different objects, so he decided to use the skill for its intended purpose. The guy had a beginner's kit that was supposed to allow him to use the skill to its fullest, so he wanted to see if he could do it. Ji-hyun tried to go to the store, but the menu with exclusive items was not available. He knew that he couldn't get stronger by catching monsters. He needed likes and bonuses to do that. The young man spent a long time digging around in the skill shop and bought one of the items on offer, a fire dragon heart that accumulated magical power. Ji-hyun was constantly learning new skills and managed to work hard and learn many skills overnight. 2 days later, he received a notification from the bank that the funds had been credited, which was the money that Chung-hee's company was supposed to pay under the contract. Immediately after the notification, a call came from the director, and Ji-hyun had no idea what he wanted to tell him. The guy picked up the phone and said hello, and the director asked if he had received the money, and he said he had, and thanked him. Jung Ji-han told the young man that he would soon receive a brochure on how to use the site, which should make his work easier. Ji-hyun said that he needed to discuss everything with his brother, and then he would call back when they made a joint decision. The guy was tired of making various decisions, and for a moment, he thought he was going to go crazy. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, and it was Ji-hyun's brother who arrived quickly enough to see him. The guy opened the door to make sure it was really him. The young man's brother stood in the doorway and happily asked if Ji-hyun had received the money yet. The guy invited his brother to come into the house and showed him the notification with the amount of enrollment, and his brother was just shocked because there were so many zeros. Ji-hyun's brother asked him where he was going to live, and the boy replied that he would probably find a better apartment to live in because he was now a hunter. The young man's brother was excited and said that he had already picked up several options for him, which surprised him because he did not expect to deal with this issue so quickly. But no one listened to his opinion anymore, and his brother dragged Ji-hyun to look at the options he found. At first, they arrived at the first address to a house with many trees and a fairly cozy yard. Then there was the next version in a more modern and lighter building. The guy's walk and apartment viewing was interrupted by a phone call to Ji-hyun, who picked up the phone from one of the company's branches. They told the young man that he had to join a private group of hunters and that as soon as everything was ready, he would be notified. Ji-hyun was immediately told that his written exam was completed and that he would not have to take this exam again. But the young man definitely did not hand in any written work, and it was explained to him that because he worked as a hunter's assistant, he had all the necessary information. Later, he will be told everything at the practical exam that will be held soon. Ji-hyun understood everything and thanked him. Over the phone, Ji-hyun was told the specifics of the exam for hunters, which was a procedure for all awakened people to be entered into a single database. The entire exam was divided into 2 parts, theoretical and practical, and data about the hunter could be entered only after passing both tests. Only in this case could the awakened officially become a hunter who risks his life but also receives many privileges. Ji-hyun was a little glad that he didn't have to take a written exam because he didn't remember everything, and the tasks were more difficult now. Ji-hyun realized that the work of a hunter's assistant was also very difficult and dangerous because he always had to deal with bodies that smelled bad and were filled with poison. But the young man was still worried about the practical exam because he did not know what to expect and did not understand the level of difficulty of the tasks. He was told that practice makes perfect and that there would be guards at the gate to assess the participants' skills and disqualify them for attempted fraud. Ji-hyun understood, but he still had a hunch that things were not as simple as they were told. The guy was advised to buy equipment and start preparing for the test. Ji-hyun thanked him and asked if he could ask for a favor. The young man said that he is currently looking for a good and safe home, but so far this search has been unsuccessful. Ji-hyun was told that there were no problems and that he would be called back soon when they found a suitable option. A few days later, he waited for the results, and a car came to pick him up. Ji-hyun was taken away by the company's director Ji-han personally, which surprised the young man. But the director replied that he had to take care of the newcomers to the company, especially since he had been wanting to talk to the guy for a long time. Jihan asked the young man if he had put on his seatbelt, and when Jihan did, the director happily exclaimed that it was now safe to drive, and they went on their way. Jihan said that since the guy had already signed a contract with the Cheonghi group, he should immediately report any problems he had and asked what kind of housing he wanted. He added that the more detailed the young man describes his wishes, the faster they will be able to find a house for him, and advised him to demonstrate all his abilities at the exam. After that, he would be assigned the appropriate rank. Ji-hyun understood, and was already starting to get a little nervous about the exam. The director and the young man came to one of the areas of the city where it was extremely quiet and peaceful, and Jihan explained that it was a complex of shelters for hunters of the Cheonghi group. But Ji-hyun had never heard of it before, and the director said that the complex was built recently, so it's not very well known to the public. He added that recently, they have hired a lot of newcomers to their company, so they decided to expand the apartments. The guy thought that it was no wonder that the Cheonghi group had so many competitors because the director was fully in line with his position. The guys arrived at the house, and the director said that it was now his house, and if he had no objections, they could sign the contract. But the guy was worried about whether it was a new house. The director said that he was new, but that his master had said goodbye to life in the dungeon yesterday. This information scared Ji-hang a little. The young man mentioned that he had read an article about the death of one of the best hunters of the Cheonghi group, and now he would live in this guy's house. The director looked at the young man and offered to take a closer look. Ji-hyun got out of the car and thought that he was definitely not looking for such a fancy house, and that's why he felt uncomfortable. They went inside a house that was designed by the best designers in the city. Ji-hang looked around as if he were in a museum. He could not even imagine that someday he would have the opportunity to live in such an impeccable home. The house was so big that the boy began to worry that some ghosts might live here, like in ancient castles. They entered the living room, which had a comfortable seating area with a designer coffee table in the middle. And on the wall hung a giant portrait of a guy who had tragically died in a dungeon and had only recently been the owner of this house. Ji-han looked at the man's photo and said that he was his uncle's favorite, and it was a pity that he died so senselessly in the midst of a battle for power. This phrase began to make the guy think that the hunter had not just died, but that someone had helped him and hoped that he would not have to be involved in the company's power games. The director asked if the young man liked the house because it was a great shelter from monsters and not everyone could afford such a place. The man added that the cost of this housing is quite low and that hunters do not pay taxes, so it is a very good deal for the guy. Choi Hyun-jin's words about not contacting the Cheonhee group did not leave Ji-hyun's mind. He was trying to decide whether to agree, because it was a special place where hunters live, which is far from human eyes. The director gave the boy a rental agreement and told him that after he had seen everything, he should go to the training center, where all the hunters would soon gather. Ji-hyun had first heard of the training center and was surprised to be invited. Jung Ji-han noted that the young man is the brightest newcomer this year and should definitely come to this meeting. The guy was reading the lease agreement and was surprised that for such a large house, the price was really not high, and it had an unusual shape. Ji-hyun wasn't sure if he should accept the house and asked if he could consult his brother. The director said that it was certainly possible and invited the boys to train at the company's training center as he had high hopes for Ji-hang and his brother. The boy immediately asked the director when he would be able to receive the awakening stone, and the man replied that his brother wished to receive it next week. Ji-hyun realized that the young man was determined to become a hunter because it was the chance of his life. The guy read the papers carefully, but nothing came out because his head was full of completely different thoughts. Ji-hyun began to worry a lot about his brother because his life was now at stake. The boy put the documents away and the director suggested that he move on. They walked along a road with high fences on its sides that hid the houses of other hunters in the company who lived there. The director and Ji-hyun arrived at the training center, which was not far from the house the boy was to rent. They approached the front door, and the young man looked around as if he had entered another dimension where everything was different from Ji-hyun's usual life. The director and the boy were walking down a long corridor, and the man told the boy that they had to secure the place because of the information leak. Ji-hyun was surprised because the training center was quite bright and spacious and could not be said to be hidden, and they walked further down the corridor. Everyone who came to meet them greeted Jung-hee Han in a nice way. There were a lot of newcomers there, and everyone was wearing different costumes, which surprised Ji-han. The director and the boy approached the elevator, and the young man noted that all the newcomers were quite confident, and Ji-han said that this was just a turning point in their lives. Ji-hyun understood this as well as anyone else, and was worried that he might embarrass himself in front of everyone present. The guy was nervous because he was told about the faction battles, which were quite brutal and meant that the exam would not be easy. Finally, they got to the training room, where everyone was engaged in various exercises and practiced various combat techniques. Ji-hyun was amazed at the scale of the gym and how it all looked. The director noted that the company is obliged to provide all the conditions for training hunters, and it was really possible to have a good time here. The hall was equipped with sparring markings, a boxing ring, dumbbells, barbells, punching bags, and everything else you could want. Ji-hyun was convinced that the Chonhee Corporation was indeed a giant and influential company. Suddenly, Ji-hyun heard his brother's voice, who was very happy to see him, but he did not expect to see his brother in this place because he was not yet awakened. He told Ji-hyun, as if to justify himself, that he was bored while the guy was dealing with the paperwork and decided to work out at the gym. Ji-hyun was very angry with his brother for not warning him about his plans to come to this place for training. He said that he could have at least told me that he was going to be here and not made such surprises, and that he should have consulted me before making any decisions. Ji-hyun noticed his brother's physical fitness, which was at the highest level. He had a good body before, but now it was even better. The coach with whom Ji-hyun's brother was training shouted at him that he could not leave the gym until the class was over, and the boy hurried back to his training while Ji-hyun and the director watched him. Ji-hyun thought about how his brother hadn't used the awakening stone yet, but he already looked like a real hunter. The coach was delighted with the boy's work ethic and physical skills. The director told Ji-hyun that there would be a sparring match with a hunter, but the boy did not quite understand who would be in the match. And when he realized that it would be his brother, he tried to convince the director that it was impossible because he was not yet awakened. But Jung Ji-han assured the boy that nothing terrible would happen because during sparring, the fighters were just practicing their physical strength. But these words did not give the young man confidence because it was still dangerous for an ordinary man and a hunter to spar. Ji-hyun asked the director if he understood correctly that they shouldn't use their abilities, and Jung Ji-han said that he shouldn't worry. The fighters were already standing in the ring and preparing for the battle, with spectators gathered around them to see what each fighter could do. Ji-hyun and the director did not stand aside and came closer to the ring. Brother Ji-hung's opponent was large and had good fighting skills. Ji-hyun was very surprised when he saw him because he was a foreigner. The director confirmed and added that he was also a newcomer like the boy's brother, and because of his excellent physical fitness, it was not easy to find a worthy opponent for him. Ji-hyun was very worried about his brother because he did not know 100% whether this fight would be safe. But the boy's brother did not share Ji-heng's feelings. He was in high spirits and tried to remain calm. The fighters were ready to start. They met in the middle of the ring and greeted each other by touching gloves, as is customary in sparring. Ji-hyun thought that his brother should be careful because he did not know what to expect from his opponent. The foreigner moved very quickly, and it was clear that he was determined to win. He kept striking, but Ji-hyun's brother managed to avoid them. The guy realized that if he continued like this, he would not be able to win because he was starting to get a little tired. Ji-hyun watched the fight and simply admired the skill of his brother, who skillfully avoided all the enemy's blows. The guy noticed that the foreigner's blows were very strong and resembled an unstoppable wind, and even without using his abilities, he was very strong. During the battle, Ji-hyun's brother tried to find the right time to attack because it was not an easy task to win. As soon as the young man noticed a gap in the foreigner's defense, he kicked him hard, but the opponent managed to put up a block. The coach supported the young man and shouted that he would succeed in order to raise his morale. The enemy was not going to give up and attacked Ji-hyun's brother with powerful speed. He made a series of blows, but it was all in vain because the guy did not miss a single one. And when the right moment came, he hit the enemy with all his might, hitting him squarely in the head. The young man was pleased with himself and with the fact that his opponent had finally let his guard down and allowed him to strike. The blow was so successful that the foreigner lost control of his body and began to fall. Observers were shocked by this development, as almost no one was betting on the victory of a guy who had not even become awake yet. Ji-hyun couldn't believe his eyes either, because although he was a newcomer, he was an official hunter. The director looked on calmly and assumed that Ji-hyun's brother had managed to hit the right spot on the impact. He added that he did not expect the guy to be so strong, and that he was not afraid to spar with the hunter. Everyone was looking at the ring and admiring Ji-hyun's brother because he had really proven himself. Jung Ji-han noted that he had never met people who could read the movements of hunters, and Ji-hyun thought that his younger brother was indeed very talented. The fight continued, and the foreigner again failed to hit the young man even a little. All his blows were just in the air. Ji-hyun's brother decided to go on the attack and was again lucky enough to deal some good blows to the enemy. And the foreigner started to get nervous because he couldn't lose to an ordinary guy because he would just be laughed at, so he decided to go against the rules. Ji-hyun noticed that his brother's opponent began to use his abilities that could cause significant damage to the young man. The foreigner's strength had increased significantly and was now hardly defeatable. Ji-hyun realized all the risks and tried to stop the fight. Ji-hyun's brother did not immediately realize what had happened and wanted to keep fighting. But in just a few seconds, he began to realize that he could not win. The director and Ji-hyun were shocked by everything that was happening because everyone knew that the powers were forbidden to use. Ji-hung's brother missed the furious blow that the enemy had dealt using his powers of strength. The guy was thrown back by a powerful blow and had no chance to hold on. He fell behind the ropes and immediately lost consciousness because an ordinary person could not withstand the blows inflicted by the hunters using their skills. The coach did not understand how such a trouble could happen and what to do if the young man did not get better. Ji-hyun immediately ran to his brother to make sure he was at least alive and asked how he was feeling. Ji-hyun's brother woke up and wanted to say something, but he was physically unable to, so Ji-hyun told him to lie still and not to strain. The coach also immediately ran to the boy because he knew that he was responsible for his injuries. Ji-hyun shouted for an ambulance because his brother was very sick and immediately asked the coach why the foreigner used his abilities despite the ban. And the man could not immediately answer, but after collecting himself, he assumed that the enemy simply could not restrain himself, and that is why such an accident occurred. But Ji-hyun didn't believe in the assumption that it was an accident because the foreigner's face seemed to say that he had used his power on purpose. The guy guessed that the opponent felt that he was losing and decided to break the rules. Ji-hyun tried to calm his brother down and asked him to be patient. The young man tried to provide first aid to his brother using his massage skills, but it was no use. The damage Ji-hyun's brother had sustained was too great. The men who stood by said that the guy probably just had no experience in sparring, so it happened. Finally, the doctors arrived and rushed to the guy to take him away and provide him with the necessary assistance. The doctors put the young man on a stretcher and applied a cold heating pad to the injured area to prevent swelling. Ji-hyun told his brother not to worry and assured him that everything would be fine and promised to make the foreigner apologize to him on his knees. The doctors took the guy and brought him to the medical office to provide the necessary information. The director stood behind him and hesitantly called out to Ji-hyun because he felt that he was also to blame. Jung Ji-han apologized to the young man and said that he did not think it would turn out like this, but Ji-hyun blamed him because he assured him that the fight was safe. The principal understood the boy's anger directed at him, but he was really sorry that such an unfortunate situation had occurred. Jung Ji-han said that the company would take full responsibility and have a proper conversation with the offender of the boy's brother. But Ji-hyun did not agree with this solution to the problem and said that he would deal with it himself. The director did not expect this from the young man and did not know how to react. Jung Ji-hwan said that he could not allow this fight because it would be very dangerous, but Ji-hyun was more than serious. The director realized that he would not be able to restrain the young man and offered to help. Jung Ji-han approached the foreigner and told him that Ji-hyun wanted to spar with him. The guy wanted revenge for his brother and wanted to teach the foreigner a lesson who did not follow the rules of sparring. The director approached Ji-hyun and said that Shelton had agreed to fight and promised to kneel down and apologize if he lost. The guy was completely disgusted with his opponent and felt that he was just trying to make fun of him because he thought he would win. Shelton stood in the ring and smiled at the young man, and Ji-hyun wanted to prove to him that he would regret for the rest of his life for breaking the rules. The director added that taking into account the fact that Ji-hyun is a beginner, they changed the rules of sparring. Both fighters could use their skills and capabilities as they wished. Ji-hyun decided to clarify whether he could use any skills or if there were any restrictions. The director said that the guy can use anything, but there is a nuance. Shelton can turn all his skin into iron. The foreigner promised not to hit him hard, but he would defend himself in full. Jung Ji-han asked the young man again if he was sure he wanted to start the fight or if he should refuse. But Ji-hyun was determined to take revenge on his brother's offender, no matter what it took. The fighters climbed into the ring and prepared for what was to be a fierce confrontation. Ji-hyun constantly replayed in his mind that he was facing his brother's offender and he had to take revenge. The trainer stood in the middle and once again announced the rules. You could give up at any time if someone was outside the ring, and if they lost, they were allowed to use their abilities. Everyone understood everything, and the coach blew the whistle to symbolize the beginning of the sparring. After the whistle blew, everyone but the fighters left the ring and got ready to watch the fight. Jung Ji-han was very worried about Ji-hyun because he realized that he could not let the young man get hurt because he had high hopes for him. The boy looked at Shelton and waited to see if he would use his defense or not, because the young man knew nothing about his opponent, and neither did he. It didn't take long for the foreigner to start using his defense, which the director informed Ji-hyun about. A moment later, Shelton was covered in iron armor, which reduced Ji-hyun's chances of winning. But this did not scare him, because such actions from the enemy were expected, so the young man did not wait and began to activate his skills. He closed his eyes and concentrated on what he had to do to help in this sparring match. The boy asked for the blessing of the gods, and his strength and agility were increased. The young man rushed into the attack, and the audience could only hear questions about what those flickering things were around the boy, assuming that they were wind spirits. The director himself was shocked because he had never seen Ji-hyun in battle in person, only on video, and did not know all the skills the guy had. The fighters were ready for the battle. Both guys were confident in their abilities and did not want to give up the lead. Shelton looked at the young man and waited for him to attack, convinced that Ji-hyun would not be able to do him any harm because he had a defense that no one could break. But Ji-hyun intended to surprise his opponent and prove that he was not as strong as he thought he was, and the young man activated his speed boost. With the speed of the wind, the guy rushed at his opponent, leaving him almost no chance to strike. All the spectators, led by the director, watched Ji-hyun with open mouths because they had never seen such speed from hunters before. The boys circled around Shelton, and the man could not catch the young man's eyes even for a moment. The foreigner couldn't understand what Ji-hyun was doing and how he was doing it. Ji-hyun stopped for just a second and activated the shadow skill, and now every time he stepped on the enemy's shadow, he took away some of his speed. The guy kept going and tried to take as much speed as possible from his opponent. When the time taken away reached 10 minutes, Ji-hyun was happy because now Shelton could hardly even move his armor. The man realized that he could do nothing, but it was too early to give up because he was afraid of becoming a laughingstock for everyone. All the viewers were shocked by Ji-hyun's work and simply admired the guy's skill. Ji-hyun realized that now was the time to act because there might not be another opportunity. The guy set himself up and used the magic skill of flying arrows to harm his opponent. Thousands of magical arrows flew out in search of their target, and you could see the terror beginning to grip Shelton. He realized that he would not be able to repel such an attack, and he had only hope for an iron skin. The arrows began to hit Shelton, and a large cloud of dust began to rise from the contact of magic with metal. The audience watched this action without looking away because they had never seen such a fight with their own eyes before. After Ji-hyun's attack, Shelton's slowing effect began to subside, and the man began to move. Luckily for the foreigner, his armor held up, and the battle had to continue. Shelton was furious and wanted to show the boy his strength because he did not want to become a laughingstock in the eyes of the audience. Its speed was quite high, considering its size and appearance. But Ji-hyun did not get confused and used the acceleration skill and managed to avoid a collision with the Iron Man. Shelton was shouting something in a language that no one but the director understood. Ji-hyun continued to move around the enemy with incredible speed and strike him. He stopped and decided it was time to finish what he had started. He decided to use the skill of high-speed strokes of white and black shadows. Ji-hyun's director watched the young man and realized that the fight would soon be over, and not in Shelton's favor. Ji-hyun fought back blow after blow and felt that this was definitely not a beginner and most likely had quite a bit of experience in fights. The director watched the fight and thought that Shelton's punches were strong enough but slow. Ji-hyun tried to think of a way to get closer to the enemy to strike. The guy thought that maybe he should buy the same protection as a foreigner because the man was really holding up quite well, but it was obvious that he was tired. Ji-hyun began to notice that he had managed to hit Shelton and the magic arrows had worked, and it was a good chance for the young man to end the fight with a victory. The guy got as close to the foreigner as possible in anticipation of his attack. As soon as Shelton raised his hand to attack the young man, Ji-hyun slipped under his arm and got behind his opponent's back without any obstacles, and he struck him with his swords on his back, where the iron skin was already damaged. The man just wanted to push the boy away, but Ji-hyun's speed was much faster than Shelton's. That's why the foreigner had to experience the guy's attacks over and over again. The iron skin was beginning to crack from the powerful blows delivered by the newly minted hunter. Ji-hyun realized that Shelton's defense was not as reliable as they had said. The guy decided not to miss his chance and started to launch fast, strong attacks that left no chance for the foreigner to stay on his feet. The shock in the director's eyes was so strong that he could not say a word. The iron armor could no longer perform its functions, and it was clear that Shelton was already in pain. Ji-hyun gathered his strength and prepared to strike the last blow to his opponent. The guy kicked Shelton hard, and the foreigner was unable to stand on his feet and began to fall. The man was on his shoulder blades, and Ji-hyun was sitting on top of Shelton holding him with his swords. The young man's opponent was unconscious, which meant that Ji-hyun had won. The boy was crazy with a thirst for revenge for his brother, and could not restrain himself, even though he had already defeated Shelton. He was shouting for the foreigner to apologize, but at that moment, a coach rushed to the young man and asked him to stop because Shelton could lose his life. The coach desperately asked the principal to stop Ji-hyun because he seemed to be unable to hear anyone. Young Ji-hyun tried to get out of his stupor and do something to make the guy stop. He slowly began to approach him and told him to calm down because the fight was over and that Shelton could not apologize now because he was unconscious. Ji-hyun lowered his weapon and gradually came to his senses after a frantic rollback of emotions. All the spectators were amazed by the fight and admired Ji-hyun, so they began to give him their likes. Ji-hyun left the ring, and men began to approach Shelton to help him. The company's director did not know what to do because he did not expect the sparring to end in such a way. The doctor examined Ji-hyun and asked him if he was a beginner, to which the young man replied that the doctor had reliable information, and it was true. The audience discussed the fight and admired Ji-hyun's powerful attacks, which helped him quickly defeat his opponent. The men were sure that the guy definitely had combat experience. Ji-hyun heard everything, but he was in no mood to answer anyone. The doctor examined him and was surprised because after such a difficult battle, there was not a single wound on the guy's body. And the discussions among the men did not end because they did not understand how Ji-hyun managed to use different skills at the same time and decided that he was God's chosen one. The conversations continued, and in the distance, at the entrance to the hall, I could see the silhouette of a girl heading toward the crowd. The girl stopped and started clapping, drawing everyone's attention to her. She said loudly, so that everyone around her could hear, that the fight was really quite interesting. Everyone turned around to see who it was, and it seemed that director Jung Ji-hyun knew the girl. He looked at her and asked if she was really his sister, as if he didn't recognize her. The director was surprised to see her in this place because he did not know she was going to come. She told her husband that he looked good, and he asked her if she really saw the whole fight. She tossed her chupa chupa with one hand and said that this fight was really very spectacular. The candy that the girl threw ended up in the hands of a drone that seemed to read the girl's thoughts. Zhang Jihan looked up and asked if she was really with the same drone with stealth technology. The girl replied that these are indeed such drones, but they are not yet fully ready. The men spoke quietly among themselves, discussing that this girl was a master mechanic of the company. Some people were surprised that she was a mechanic, while others admired her because she was very famous, having become the best mechanic in the country. The girl and the director approached the boy and asked if Zhang Jihan would like to introduce her to Ji Hyun, whom she already knew in absentia. Ji then talked to the doctor about Shelton breaking the rules when he fought with his brother. The girl intervened in their conversation and said that rules are rules, but maybe Young Jihan could make a concession. But it seemed that the director had already made up his mind and was not going to compromise his principles. The girl sighed and said that they would return to this topic later. She continued to ask Jong Hyun about Ji Hyun's relation to the wounded boy. The girl immediately started digging through the information about the guys made by a miniature drone. They were so small that you couldn't see them. They looked like spy drones. The girl read all about Ji Hung's brother and asked if they wanted to use the stone to wake the young man up, because the sooner the better. The director was about to answer his sister, but she interrupted him and said that the question was not addressed to him. And Ji Hyun, after all, had the right to participate in the decision-making process regarding his brother's future. The girl approached Ji Hyun and said that she had seen him fight and liked him very much, and she would like to help her and her brother. She smiled slightly and waited for the decision of the guy who had impressed everyone with his skills. Ji Hyun Jong-han and his sister walked together along a long and wide corridor. The guy walked a little behind and thought how lucky he was to meet the best master mechanic in this country. The girl was the illegitimate daughter of the second son of the Chonhee group and also worked for the company. There were many rumors about her, and the most common was that she could bring cars to life and could breathe life into anything. Ji Hyun would like to see it with his own eyes someday because it was hard to believe. But looking at her flying drones, these rumors no longer seemed nonsense. Thanks to her, hunters could not be afraid to use their abilities. The girl was a genius who gave rise to the era of magical engineering. Ji Hyun also heard that she awakened with the help of an awakening stone. They came to Ji Hyun's brother's room and the boy asked the girl to help save his brother. The girl said that the guy would soon come to and suggested using the awakening stone right now. Ji Hyun didn't expect to have to make a decision so quickly and knew how to do the right thing. He was worried that his brother was still very weak and had not yet recovered. The girl added that in such a state, it would be best to use a stone, and the guy's emotional energy was just above average. Ji Heng heard about emotional energy for the first time and began to think about whether he should take advantage of this offer now. The girl explained to the young man that human feelings are the decisive factor, and it is generally believed that the stone works better on people who need help. She added that there was an unspoken rule that the stone should be used when you were angry and unhappy. But Ji Hyun still wasn't sure. The girl leaned over to Ji Hyun's brother and asked him if he agreed, adding that she had given him first aid, so he should have regained consciousness by now. Ji Heng's brother opened one eye and asked her how long she had noticed that he could hear everything. Ji Hyun was shocked that she had managed to bring his brother back to life in such a short period of time. The guy asked about his brother's health, and he replied that he had recently been beaten in front of his brother, so he was not feeling well. The girl looked at the boys and noticed that she was right about them being brothers, and that they were very pleasant to watch. Ji Hyun was very worried about his brother's health and asked him not to strain himself to make it worse. He put his hand on his brother's hand and thought that it seemed to be completely healed and there was not a single scratch on it. Ji Hyun looked at the girl and thanked her for saving his brother. He asked how he could thank her for her help, and the girl replied that in that case she had a proposal for Ji Hyun, and she asked me to do just 2 things for her that she would like. The first thing she wished was that the guy would keep his word and fulfill his promise. The young man asked what the promise was, and the girl asked him not to ask and just to agree, even though it sounded like a bold request. Ji Hyun's brother was just lying on the bed waiting for the boy's answer, as he had no idea what the conversation was about. Ji Hyun thought about it for a while and said that he agreed to fulfill this request. The second request was that Ji Hyun should open a mukbang channel on the platform with his brother. The mukbang videos were based on the fact that they had to show what they were eating and sometimes talk to their subscribers, but the guys were definitely not happy about this condition. Ji Hyun decided to ask if he had understood everything correctly, and the girl confirmed that he had. The guy started thinking about the channel because he realized that on this channel, he could collect likes and then buy new abilities with them. The girl added that she would cover all the expenses and that they would share the profits equally. Ji Hyun's brother said that just eating for the camera is very easy, so you can try it. The girl was happy that the guys had almost agreed and they would be doing something together. But Ji Hyun realized that whether it was simple or not, these videos would definitely look strange. The guy was constantly trying to figure out whether he would be able to earn a lot of likes with a video in this format or not. Ji Hyun eventually agreed, and she offered the boys to borrow some of her drones to help them create content. She was happy that Ji Hyun gave a positive answer and immediately asked how strong his brother wanted to become. He immediately said that he wanted to become as strong as he could. The girl added that the path of the hunter is quite thorny, and whether the guy was ready for it, he replied that he was, and the girl's drones were ready to start the procedure. She immediately said that the company was not responsible for any possible consequences because this procedure is not licensed in their country. She asked him if he was ready to take the risk, and Ji-hyun's brother thought about whether he should agree to it. The guy had heard of the girl as a master mechanic, and she was also called a mad scientist, and there were rumors that she even conducted experiments on people. The girl smiled and added that bureaucracy takes a lot of time, so she suggested that it should be considered a formality. And after these words, the guy realized that the gossip about her was true. The girl stood next to the young man and asked him how it felt to be her test subject. And without waiting for an answer, she told me not to worry and that everything would be fine. She continued to convince him and said it would be a pity if the brothers had to lose each other. And the young man began to feel afraid. Of course, he wanted to believe the girl's words, and her rich experience inspired confidence. The guy gritted his teeth and decided that it was too late to turn back and give up one step before the longed-for awakening. He looked the girl in the eye and said he agreed and asked her to take care of him. The girl smiled and said it was nice to deal with smart people. She said it was time to start and asked if I had mentioned that the procedure was not painful at all. But Ji-hyun's brother could hardly believe it, and his fear only grew, but he had already made up his mind and had to start. The boy had a dream in which he was with his brother Ji-hyun, who called him and said that he had bought a ham, and he was very happy because they didn't have much money and ham was a festive dish. The boy immediately offered to eat it, and Ji-hyun told his brother to bring the bread while he went to cut up the delicious food. Ji-hyun went to the kitchen and began to cut the ham into slices, shouting at his brother to hurry up. He quickly returned with bread, and they began to enjoy a delicious meal. Suddenly, different words began to appear before his eyes, and he was frightened and told Ji-hyun that this ham was strange. But his brother instantly disappeared and he was left alone, while he seemed to be picked up by something and moved to another place. And over his head, new entries of words and individual letters were constantly appearing. Ji-hyun's brother was very scared because he did not understand what was happening, and his older brother was missing. He ran out of the apartment and asked his brother for help, but there was no one around. Suddenly, he stopped and saw that unknown inscriptions were appearing and changing around him on the street. And these words began to fill absolutely everything around him, and the young man found himself in the grip of unknown signs. The guy desperately tried to understand what these signs were and what they meant, but it was all in vain. The young man was calling his older brother, but suddenly an unknown man appeared in front of him and asked why he had called him. The guy was now even more frightened because he wasn't going to bother anyone and call them. The man seemed very scary and big to the little boy, and it was difficult to see him because his hood completely covered his face. They stood opposite each other, and the boy seemed to calm down a bit. Ji-hyun's brother did not understand anything at all and did not know what to expect from this strange man. The man looked at the young man carefully and said that it was because of him that he had to appear in this place. He added that he felt that the young man was looking for a way to the river of truth, but it seemed that he came too soon. The boy was looking at the man's face and constantly wondering who he was. The man continued to say that the boy was very strong and had great potential. But the young man could not say a word, even though he wanted to ask many questions. It felt like his voice had simply disappeared. But the man did not stop and said that the one who understood part of the truth would receive a gift from him and asked what the boy wanted. The young man gathered his thoughts and dared to voice his wish. The guy said he really wanted to help his brother and was ready to do anything for him. The man looked the boy up and down and asked if this meant he wanted to keep the family together. The old man began to cast spells and said that the boy was very interesting and had a very pure soul, but that being born from ink hieroglyphics, his life would not be easy. The man looked at the young man and said that it was his gift and asked if he was ready to accept it. The boy began to approach him, and the man said that the young man could stay in this place as long as he wanted, but the boy refused because he had many things to do. The man said that then we would have to say goodbye and called him a child of the evil world, after which the boy seemed to fall through the ground. Suddenly, Ji-hyun's brother opened his eyes and woke up in the hospital room where he had been before. After waking up, he immediately began to scream, as if his dream had not yet ended and the young man was still falling down. When Ji-hyun heard his brother's voice, he was surprised that the boy had regained consciousness so quickly. The girl looked at him from the outside, as if she had no doubt that she would succeed. Ji-hyun ran up to his brother and immediately started asking him how he was feeling and if everything went well. The young man smiled and said that he was fine and felt very well. Ji-hyun could finally breathe out and calm down because his brother was not injured after the procedure. The girl interrupted the boy's conversation and began to say that everything had worked out and the boy had returned safely and asked if he had said goodbye to Young and Ting. The guy was lying down after the procedure and did not even have time to answer the question. Ji-hyun asked the girl who she was asking about and why his brother had to say goodbye to someone. At that moment, Ji-hyun's brother realized who the man from the dream was and that it was not a dream at all. The young man saw one of the drones shining a blue light at him. The guy was lying still because he did not quite understand what the machine was doing and why his body was being scanned. A few minutes later, the drone began to signal that the scan was complete, and the girl offered to look at the results. The girl was looking at the information provided by the drone and was very surprised by the result. She looked at brother Ji-hyun and congratulated him because he had been promoted to a rank. Ji-hyun was shocked, just like his brother, because it took a lot of work to get the A rank. She was just very happy with her work because not every time everything ended so positively. The young man was overjoyed that his dream had come true, that all the risks had paid off, and that he could now be reunited with his brother. The boys and the director came to the training room, and Jung Ji-han told the boys about the records that allowed them to explore the dungeon. And he said that they would be able to coordinate with them easily, and this would make their work easier. But Ji-hyun's brother had doubts that even with his rank, it would hardly work, because he knew nothing about his abilities. And the director suggested that he try to use his skills right now. The young man was a little embarrassed, but agreed to try. Ji-hyun also supported this idea and asked his brother to show his abilities to him. The guy agreed and began to tune in to his newly acquired powers. The young man concentrated and tried to use his abilities for their intended purpose. At first, he imagined what it should look like, and he started to get it right, and the magic began to manifest itself. Unknown symbols began to cover the boy's entire body and clothes. These symbols appeared even on his face and head, and the whole action was simply mesmerizing. Unexpectedly, these symbols began to swirl around Ji-hyun. One of the signs appeared on the guy's clothes, and it felt very strange, not like usual. The boy was surprised that his brother used his powers to test him. Symbols covered Ji-hyun's skin, and he had no idea what to expect, but he trusted his brother. He felt his skin begin to grow stronger than usual. Ji-hyun loudly asked his brother if he understood correctly that he now had the skills of Shelton. The guy felt that his body had become as strong as steel, and it was a great armor. He was very happy because now it could be used during various battles. The director was watching and was really impressed that the young man could do such things. Ji-hyun was so impressed that he asked his brother to demonstrate some more of his abilities. But the guy said that he hadn't had time to properly understand everything yet, but he could already make it stronger, faster, heavier, lighter, and all that. But Jung Ji-han was a bit surprised that this was all he had learned, because of course, these are good skills, but they were clearly not up to grade A. Ji-hung's brother was of course upset that, despite his high rank, his powers did not quite meet expectations. Ji-hyun didn't really understand why there was such a discrepancy in rank and strength, or if his brother was hiding something. After all, there had to be something else, and Ji-hyun hoped that his brother would tell him everything in person later. The boy's brother did not want to wait, and immediately asked the director to sign a contract with him. This initiative surprised not only the director, but also Ji-hyun, as he did not expect his brother to sign a contract with the company so quickly. But the director was not at a loss, and said that given everything the boys had been through, he expected this topic to be raised. Ji-hyun decided to ask if his brother had thought it through, because he hadn't expected him to be so quick to sign the contract. And the guy immediately said that he just didn't want his brother Ji-hyun to be alone. He added that if they work in pairs, their chances will be much higher. Ji-hyun was very surprised that this was a really good reason for the guy to sign the contract so quickly. The young man added that he had already said that wherever Ji-hyun was, he would always be there to live together and die together. And the young man immediately decided to change the subject and said that he was now awakened to the same class A. Ji-hyun thought that his brother was right, and there was no point in trying to convince him. The director said that if the young man was ready, they would prepare a contract, but he would also have to pass an exam. Not only practical, but also theoretical. The guy was ready for any exam because all the exams he passed had only the best marks. Ji-hyun confirmed that he had been so smart since childhood, and the director assured him that there was nothing to worry about. Jung Ji-han added that Ji-hyun seems very happy to have beaten Shelton. Ji-hyun's brother knew nothing about it, and was very surprised that the young man was fighting with a foreigner. But Ji-hyun modestly replied that one should not exaggerate his achievements so much. But the director didn't really agree that he was exaggerating, because the guy managed to win without getting a single scratch. Ji-heng's brother was really surprised that his older brother was so skilled. He was surprised that the young man managed to avoid any injuries, and said that he would certainly like to see the battle with his own eyes. The director said that he would contact the boys when the contract was ready and hurried to say goodbye, because he had urgent business. Ji-hyun also said goodbye, and added that he would see him later, because he wanted to talk to his brother alone. The boys stood in the hall and watched Jung Jae-han leave the training room. When the director came out, Ji-heng supported his brother and said that he had done a great job of demonstrating his abilities. Ji-hyun was even happy that they could now spend time together both in training and during monster battles. He decided to ask his brother who he saw during the awakening procedure. The young man said that during his sleep, he saw various symbols and signs, but could not understand them. The guy assumed that he did not understand all this because he had just awakened, and some god had contacted him. He immediately asked Ji-hyun if he had seen the gods when he became awakened. Ji-hyun's situation was a little different, but he didn't want to talk about it in order not to upset or scare his younger brother. But the young man realized that Ji-hyun had not seen the gods as he had, and this seemed very strange to him. Ji-hyun decided to change the subject and suggested going out to eat. but the guy had a lot of questions that no one could give a clear answer to. The young man thought it was strange why Ji-hyun couldn't see the gods, which meant that there was some kind of malfunction in the system, and it was wrong. And these words of his brother made Ji-hyun think that something was really going wrong. The guys came to the canteen to have a snack and talk in a relaxed atmosphere. There were not many people, and no one interrupted their conversation. Ji-hyun's brother said that he saw the four eyes that see the truth on the ibis papyrus, and someone close to Hwang Hee, but the real name of the god did not appear. He knew that the gods who chose him were the same gods who sent him the message, and he assumed that these are the four eyes that see the truth, or in another way, he was also called Tsangjia. Ji-hyun listened attentively and did not interrupt. I just asked who Tsangjia was, and the young man began to say that he didn't know the details, but he had heard that it was he who invented the Chinese writing system. People say that he was not only an emperor, but also a deity, although there is no exact data, but whoever he was a powerful god. The boy hoped that he would be able to master the skill with Chinese characters in the future. Ji-hyun summarized that his brother had great potential and was not in vain enrolled in Class A. He immediately asked for details about the papyrus, and the young man said that it was a little easier, and he thought it was the god Thoth from Egypt. He is the god of wisdom and knowledge, and he knows all the secrets of the world, which is why he is also called the god of magic. Ji-hyun was surprised and asked if this could mean that his brother would be able to learn ancient skills. And the young man immediately said that since he was the god who found the hieroglyphs of Egypt, he must have powerful ancient magic. Ji-hyun looked at his brother and thought that these were writings, and perhaps they connected the boy to the gods. But that was not all, and the young man began to talk about another unknown person who was close to Hwang Hee. The boy did not know exactly who it was, but the only name that came to his mind was Kangil. He had heard somewhere that some heroes who were not gods could also choose hunters. Ji-hyun tried to put all the information he had received on the shelves and could only guess what abilities his brother could have. The guy noticed that Ji-hyun was thinking and asked him what was going on in his head, and Ji-hyun said that it was just too complicated to understand. He understood little about legends and writings, so he knew almost nothing about how they could be useful and what power they had. He had also heard that an ordinary person should not mess with the gods at all. But if his brother was chosen, why not think about Sejong the Great, who was the one who invented the Korean writing system? The guy thought that he could probably get bonuses since they all used the system invented by this god. The young man felt that in any case, he had to follow the advice of the gods who had chosen him, for he might miss something important if he chose the wrong god. Ji-hyun didn't quite understand how his brother could feel this way and understand how to choose the right person. At the same time, he felt that he would be able to achieve great success in his new life. A few weeks passed, and the day of the exam for the hunters came. On this day, many people gathered outside the center. The journalists wanted to talk to the newcomers and get at least a few comments on their expectations and mood. A group of newly minted hunters gathered at the entrance and waited for further explanations. Ji-hyun was a little confused by the fact that there were more journalists than hunters, and his brother suggested that the reason could be the video of Ji-hyun sparring with Shelton. He said that people are still shocked by the newcomer who dealt with an experienced hunter in 2 seconds. Ji-hyun noticed that the residents were delighted with the video because the likes were pouring in. The guys were walking down the hall and suddenly stopped because they noticed a familiar face. They were surprised that the director was present at the event, and Jong Ji-han said that he should be present at such important meetings. The director began to tell Ji-hyun that he was pleasantly surprised that his sparring video had become the first in the recommendations in a short time. Jong Ji-hyun added that the whole country was going crazy and constantly watching every step of the young man, and Ji-hyun was a little embarrassed by this. The director also added that they had to fire Shelton after he failed to control his emotions and violated the rules of sparring. Jung Ji-han said that the foreigner had created many problems for the company before, and his professionalism was in question, so the decision to dismiss him was made unanimously. Ji-hyun's brother smiled and said that he even felt a little sorry for Shelton. The director looked out the window and drew the boy's attention to the crowd of Ji-hyun fans who had even created a fan club in his honor. He added that after all the events, that's what people do. Support him, and immediately asked if he could continue to rely on the boy's support because it was important to the company. Ji-hyun was embarrassed by the amount of attention and assured him that he would not let Jung Ji-han and the Jeonhee company down. A man at the door to the classroom announced that all candidates had to go to the exam room and follow all the instructions to confirm their identity. Ji-hyun began to worry that the exam was about to begin, and his brother immediately wished him good luck. The principal told the young man that he had found someone from Jeonjin to help him with the exam. Ji-hyun's brother immediately realized what director Jeongjin was talking about. It was a branch of the Jeonhee company, and the CEO was Jihan Jung. A young girl approached the boys, and the director said that she was their employee who would help Ji-hyun with the exam. Ji-hyun greeted him kindly and thought that only recently he had been the hunter's assistant, and now he had an assistant himself. So the boy and his girlfriend went for an identity check before the exam. The young man's brother looked at him admiringly and was incredibly proud of his older brother's success. Director Jung Ji-han had high hopes for the boy because he was a golden bonus for the entire company. Ji-hyun couldn't come to his senses because he had recently worked dismantling the bodies of all kinds of monsters, and now he was going to take an exam to become a real hunter. Ji-hyun passed the identification, but his assistant had to get a special pass from the guards. Ji-hyun was more serious than ever and promised himself that he would definitely cope with all the challenges he would face in the exam. All the candidates for hunters were walking down the corridor to the exam venue, and the guy noticed that he was more nervous than usual. After that, he looked around and realized that he was not the only one, because right now the test that could change the fate of each of those present would begin. Then all the candidates were invited to the locker rooms and asked to change their exam uniforms and wait for notification before entering the main hall. One of the men directed the examinees so that they would not worry about going through the wrong door. Everyone successfully went to the locker rooms and began to change into their uniforms and get ready for the exam. Next, everyone had to undergo a basic medical examination of hunters, and doctors asked to follow all instructions to prevent possible health-related troubles for the candidates. First, they checked for deviations in vision, as this was an important aspect for a hunter, and then there were many other things that could affect the result of the work. Finally, Ji-hung was invited to the examination, and the boy went for a checkup. He entered an office with a large machine that resembled an MRI machine. The young man asked what kind of device it was, and the doctor replied that it was a machine that measured the strength of a hunter. She explained that you just need to go inside and lie down for a minute. Ji-hyun didn't quite understand whether this machine measured strength, skill level, or something else. The doctor instructed me and warned me to lie flat and not move until the procedure was completed. The guy was already inside the car and heard the doctor say that he would receive the test results in a week. The boy was lying still with his eyes closed, and the rays of light scanned his entire body, just as the drone had scanned his brother after he woke up. All the candidates passed the medical examination and were informed that it was time for the exam and they had to go to the waiting room. The guard emphasized that it was necessary to wear suits, and if someone did not have a suit, they should wear a basic one that would be provided in the locker room. When Ji-hyun heard this, he was very surprised that he could wear his own costume because he believed that all candidates should be on equal footing. Ji-heng's assistant, whom the director had found for him, was already in the hall and called him over. She asked if the young man had completed the examination, and Ji-hyun said that he had already passed everything, and the assistant said that the director asked me to give him something for him. The girl handed the guy a package. Ji-hung took it and thanked him and asked what was inside. The assistant replied that it was a custom-made suit made especially for the young man. Ji-hyun looked at it and wondered if it had magical powers. The girl explained that this costume is made of black eagle skin, so it is very resistant to heat and shock. She added that there are rumors that this suit was created by a famous Italian craftsman and that it seems to be the most expensive of all those present. Ji-hyun was not expecting such a gift and could not even imagine how much the suit cost. The girl remembered one more thing and handed Ji-hyun a watch. The guy was surprised and asked if it was his watch, and the assistant said that it was and that he could wear it to the exam. The guy picked up the watch and noticed that something was wrong with it, as it seemed to be heavier than usual, but he put it on his hand anyway. I didn't dwell on it, because maybe it felt that way because they were from another dimension. All the candidates had already entered the waiting room and were getting ready for the test. Ji-hyun put on his new outfit, which was presented by director Jung Ji-han. The guy noted that the size was exactly right for him, and the suit was extremely comfortable. He looked around and noticed that there were quite a few hunters who came with their own costumes. Suddenly, Ji-hyun heard something happening from the side and a commotion. A conflict broke out between the two boys, and one of them, who was dressed as a hunter, held the other boy by the shirt collar and shouted. Due to the sudden movements, the glass with the drink fell to the floor and broke. The guy who was hanging in the air was screaming and begging to be let go and put on the ground. The hunter lost his temper because the young man put ice in the drink, which the hunter had not asked to add. The guy said he was very sorry for such an unfortunate mistake and hoped that nothing would happen to him. The hunter was furious and asked the young man where he had ever studied if he could not remember such simple things. All the candidates just stood by and watched what was happening, but Ji-hyun was not going to be silent and decided to stand up for the boy. The young man was still begging him to let him go to no avail, while Ji-hyun had already approached them to find out the cause of the conflict. He loudly told the hunter that he had to stop this abuse because the young man had asked him to let him go more than once. The man looked at Ji-hyun and asked him what he wanted, and the boy said that the hunter should immediately release the young man. The hunter glared at Ji-hyun and asked him why he was ordering him around, adding that he only met jerks today who spoiled his mood. And he sternly asked Ji-hyun if he even knew who he was talking to in such a tone, making it clear that the young man should not interfere in his affairs. But Ji-hyun didn't know this guy, so he wasn't going to be afraid of a man he didn't know for no reason. Ji-hyun sharply put his hand on the hunter's forearm and once again ordered him to let go of the young man, which made the man go cold, for Ji-hyun's strength was inhuman. The hunter was incredibly surprised and even asked Ji-hyun what his strength was. The guy was in no hurry to answer because he believed that this was not the kind of question a man should ask him. Ji Hyun continued to press on the hunter's arm and demanded that he stop abusing the young man, and the hunter's arm broke. All the candidates watched them without looking away because they did not expect something like this to happen in the waiting room. The hunter tried to restrain Ji Hyun's power, but realized that he was clearly stronger than him. Ji Hyun then looked closely into the man's eyes and asked if he knew him. The hunter hastily replied that he had seen Ji Hyun's video and began to use his ability. The man had the skill of flame, and he decided to use it to teach the young man a lesson for not following his instructions about a drink without ice. The guy burst into flames like a match before everyone's eyes, realizing that it was the end for him. Ji Hyun was confused for a moment, because he couldn't even imagine that any of the hunters could afford to use their powers to harm other people. All the candidates stood around the boys and watched, not trying to stop what was happening. Ji Hyun was shocked because they had no right to use force against ordinary people, but the hunter didn't seem to be bothered by it at all. The guy really didn't like the fact that the man was enjoying his hunting privileges and was confident in his untouchability. And he decided to stop the arbitrariness that the man began to commit and grabbed his arm with all his might. Ji Hyun knew that his suit had to withstand the fire, so he was not afraid of getting burned, and the young man was just holding on with his last strength to avoid losing his life. The hunter didn't like the fact that Ji Hyun was also using his powers and reducing the power of the hunter's abilities. Ji Hyun replied that it was just a healing skill, and if the fire could not be stopped, he would just start to treat it. The guy once again ordered the hunter to stop committing illegal actions because he would have to answer for it. Ji Hyun asked the hunter if he really didn't realize that now was not the time to measure strength, because everyone here was an enemy to each other, because everyone wanted to become an official hunter. He added that with such manifestations, he would reveal all his capabilities, and everyone would know his weaknesses, and if there was any more noise, he would simply be excluded from the exam. The man seemed to realize that he was making a big mistake, and Ji Hyun was right. Everyone present watched the situation develop, and definitely did not miss a chance to memorize the hunter's weaknesses. And the man finally let go of his assistant, who no longer had any hope of being saved. Ji Hyun immediately enveloped the young man with healing magic to provide first aid and prevent a fatal accident. But the hunter could not just calm down and promise Ji Hyun that he would fast for him. The man gritted his teeth and walked in the other direction, pretending that nothing had happened. Ji Hyun healed the young man and asked him if he was okay and how he felt. After saving the boy, Ji Hyun received 10 bonuses at once and decided to ask the young man who the hunter was. And the young man began to tell me that he was the awakened one who controls the flame. His name was Yom Radu, and he had awakened quite recently, right after Ji Hyun. Ji Hyun did find the name Yom familiar, and he had seen the man somewhere before. When Ji Hyun was working as a hunter's assistant, he often met novice hunters who behaved as if they were allowed to do anything. The guard entered the waiting room and informed everyone that the examiner had already arrived and asked everyone to get ready. The candidates lined up and waited for the examiner to tell them what they had to do next. The woman confidently entered the hall and said that she was glad to see everyone there full of strength and energy. She said that her name was Yoon Rumi, and she was from the Ministry of Justice, so it is unlikely that anyone in the room would know her. The woman was examining all the applicants for the title of hunter. Ji Hyun, when he heard that she was from the Ministry of Justice, could not believe that this is the body that reports to the president that will control this exam. Yom Rumi said that their names and faces are worthless now, and that she will be taking the exam today, adding that she has already noticed several interesting candidates. She hinted at Ji Hyun and Yom Rada and went on to say that they all had to sign the documents first. Those who signed the agreement that the government was not responsible for their loss of life, they would no longer be civilians, but would immediately become soldiers. Ji Hyun read the consent and was very scared to sign such a document because they had not even been told what the exam would consist of. Most of the candidates did not hesitate for a second to sign because they agreed to do anything to become a hunter. After signing the agreement, security guards walked through the hall and collected all the signed documents. Yoon Rumi stood at the entrance and waited for all the formalities to be settled. She announced that if everyone agreed, there was no turning back now and began to explain the rules. The woman walked alongside the candidates and told them to listen very carefully because no one would repeat themselves. The exam will be held in a dungeon, and participants will receive points. All actions of the presidents will be recorded by drones. She warned them that even if someone could shoot at them, she did not advise them to do so, and asked if everyone understood that they would have to work alone. Yoon Rumi paused and said that the main goal of the exam was to destroy as many monsters as possible. She immediately asked if anyone had any questions, but everyone was more than clear, so the participants just kept quiet. The woman looked at everyone and said that she had explained the rules and now they could move on to the next stage. All applicants had to wear blindfolds, and the participants had to organize themselves into groups of 5. After that, they chose the right weapon for themselves, which they had to be good at. And then, in groups of 5, the candidates will enter the dungeon through the gate. Everyone's task was to find the crystal ball while fighting the monsters. The test will be completed only when the crystal ball is destroyed, and only now the signal was given to put on the eye patch, and the test began. All the candidates for the title of hunter stood at the entrance to the dungeon. Ji-hyun was ready to start his own exam, and he was confident that he would succeed. On the platform, he started receiving notifications that this exam was dangerous and he should take care of himself. The young man was wondering if it was normal for the exam to take place in a dungeon, and when he took off the blindfold, he saw the door behind which it was to begin. Ji-hang's bandage fell to the floor, and he heard the voices of the people he was in the same group with. Ji-hyun heard a question from one of his group, and the man asked where they were going. When the guy turned around and saw this member of his group, he was shocked because it was Yom Radu. The man himself recognized the young man at once and could barely control himself from attacking him. The hunter clearly did not like the fact that he and Ji-hyun were in the same group. The guy thought the same thing and told Yomrad that he had stolen his words. Another member of their group interrupted their conversation and said that she did not quite understand the nature of the conflict. And the girls seemed to have an epiphany and asked if this dungeon was part of their exam. John Radu said that this may be true because in previous years there was something similar. And the man decided to praise himself and said that he was so strong that the committee decided to make this year's task more difficult. Ji-hyun looked at him with an appraising gaze and noticed the metal gloves and thought it was a terrible choice. But the girls who were on Ji-hyun's team decided that they needed to introduce themselves, saying that their names were Ban-jin An and Ban-jin Woo, and they were twins. Ji-hyun suddenly heard strange sounds coming from the dungeon. The last member of the group was his cousin Ion Radu, and they tried to stay together all the time. Ji-hyun realized that all the members of his group were relatives, so it turned out that he was all alone. Young Radu called his brother and said that they could handle it on their own, and Ji-hyun turned to the girls and said that they had to fight together now. When they saw John Radu walking with his brother, they started to stop them because no one knew what was behind the stone wall. Ion Radu shouted that as long as they were standing here, they would not know. Ji-hyun mentally realized that their group would definitely not be able to complete the task because everyone was trying to pull the leadership blanket over themselves. John Radu's cousin listened to his relative's instructions and went to the wall to open the door behind which something unknown was hidden. The guy made a lot of effort to open the door because they decided it was the best way. Ion Radu only had time to ask what his brother saw, but the guy's face clearly showed that there was nothing pleasant behind the door. As soon as the door opened from the dungeon, monsters began to attack the group of newly minted hunters. Ion Radu decided that he and his brother had to fight this monster themselves to earn more bonuses. The monster turned out to be a giant lizard, and none of the hunters had ever seen one before. The girls with Ji-hyun just couldn't believe that they had to face such strong monsters. Usually, giant lizards were fought by hunters, but Ji-hyun knew that this creature was 4 times stronger than the goblins he had fought. And on top of that, lizards could feel people with their skin, and that's why they were almost invincible in dark dungeons. Ion Radu was so overconfident that instead of being afraid of the monster, he only provoked it to attack. The giant lizard didn't expect anything out of the ordinary and knew only one thing to attack. John Radu and his cousin both had the power of flame, so they prepared to strike the monster with fireballs. The man was just boiling over, waiting for the right moment to attack, and at that moment, he shouted to his brother that they should act simultaneously. Ji-hyun looked at the man's preparations and couldn't figure out whether he was a fool or so arrogant that he thought he was immortal. After all, it was very unwise to use the flame skill in such a narrow cave, so Ji-hung simply prepared his sword just in case. The boy was standing with the girls and decided to use the wild screaming skill to be able to harm the monster and not injure the members of his group. At this time, the director was watching the dungeon from his office, and suddenly something changed and the dungeon grew, and Yong Jae-han did not understand why these changes were happening so quickly. Since the gates were already closed, it was impossible for any of the candidates to go back. The man, not knowing how to help Ji-hyun, simply watched him thanks to the cameras that were built into the drones. Young Ji-han realized that in order to survive, all the participants had to run and fight until the crystal broke. The director did not know whether Ji-hyun would be able to survive because the dungeon was constantly growing. The more hunters there were, the bigger the dungeon became, and accordingly, the monsters became stronger and harder to defeat. Although it was difficult to win, the reward was also bigger than usual, which attracted hunters. All the company employees who watched the exam were shocked that this happened, and the applicants for hunting jobs did not even suspect that the danger was increasing. No one realized the true magnitude of the danger except Jung Jae-han, who watched everything from the screen. The director thought about how Ji-han had never told him about his abilities, but Ji-han knew for sure that he was stronger than the others. Ji-han simply had to pass all the tests, because otherwise, all of humanity would come to an end. At that moment, the director was hesitant to continue watching or to stop the exam and save the novice hunters. He realized that no matter how much technology develops in the future, as long as there is such a problem as monsters, the whole world will not be saved. Jung Ji-han thought that Ji-hyun had to endure everything for the sake of saving all humanity on the planet. The director had high hopes for Ji-hyun's strength because he knew he was the best and had awakened for a reason. Yom Radu provoked a giant explosion with his actions, which was supposed to be able to handle the lizard. Ji-hyun was enraged by the thoughtless actions of a man who did not think that there were other people behind him whom he could have injured. Suddenly, the boy received a task that said he had to go into the dungeon, defeating a large lizard and get out of the intermediate dungeon. But Ji-hyun did not yet understand how to do it, because the monster was actually very strong. The young man looked at the monster, which looked just like a real one, and could not understand how the examiners could send them to a real dungeon and not a training one. Yomradu was gleefully attacked by a giant lizard, and it seemed that he did not realize that he could lose his life. The man did not stop and boldly went into battle, and nothing could stop him. Together with their cousin, they tried to strike simultaneously to increase the possibility of destroying the monster. But as soon as they dealt with one, another appeared, and it was clear that sooner or later, their strength would run out. But Yomradu, because of his own foolishness, did not realize what danger was really waiting for them. The number of monsters was growing every minute, and the two brothers could no longer cope with them. But they were not going to ask their group for help because they were obsessed with earning more bonuses. The girls were furious that they had to watch two self-confident fools trying to deal with monsters they were not strong enough to handle. Ji-hyun looked closely at the monsters and analyzed what he could know about them to find gaps in their defense and deal with them faster. While working as a hunter's assistant, he saw many different giant lizards, but these were different, and the color of their scales was also different. Ji-hyun was straightforward and could not understand whether the brothers had really decided to go on alone. Yomradu and his cousin were in a hurry to move on, and Ji-hyun asked if they were serious about going without them. Yomradu turned around and said that of course they would go themselves, because they didn't want to bother with Ji-hyun and the twins. He went on to say that if they wanted to join them, they had to get down on their knees and beg them to take them with them. The members of the group definitely did not expect such impudence from Yomradu and were shocked by his statement. They had not yet recovered from his antics in the waiting room when he started saying things that you couldn't put your finger on. Ji-hyun realized that any talks with Yomradu were useless, so he turned to Banjin-an and Banjin-woo and told them that they were now in the same boat and had to act together. If they work together, then the exam will not be difficult, and the chances of survival will be definitely higher, and offered to go with Yomradu if anyone wants to. Banjin-an and Banjin-woo did not know what to do at that moment, but they did not hesitate for long and answered Ji-hyun that it was definitely dangerous to go with Yomradu because he would definitely use them as a shield. Ji-hyun remembered the man's behavior and understood why the twins chose to go with the young man, and he said he hoped they would be able to work together. The twins immediately said that they had already seen what the boy was capable of and offered to show him their abilities. Ji-hyun didn't even know what to say, so he just looked at his colleagues in silence. Banjin-an said she was a blacksmith and showed me her hammer, which she uses in battle. And Banjin-woo was a master of threads and could use them to create traps and for attacks. Jin-woo said he realized that neither of them had strong skills, so they would probably lose, but Jin-an and Ji-hyun were more positive. The three of them looked in the direction they were going, and there was no sign of Yomradu or his brother. And Ji-hyun suggested that they shouldn't waste time and go on an adventure. They slowly walked forward very carefully so as not to expose themselves to danger once again. At this time, Yomradu and his brother moved forward very quickly and became far from their group. Ji-hyun carefully considered every detail and used his all-seeing eye skill. Suddenly, the boy found something interesting behind the wall and asked if Jinan could break it down so they could get to the other side. Banjin-an said she could do it and set to work. She used her main skill, the power of the hammer, to break the wall. A second later, there was a giant hole in the wall through which the group got into the devil's hideout, and Jin-an said she hoped the lizards wouldn't come for them. Banjin-woo noticed that his sister was not feeling well and asked how she was, to which Jin-an said that she had just overdone it a bit. Ji-hang was very surprised by this because she had used her skill only once. Suddenly, the twins heard strange sounds that scared them. The group members began to look around and were surprised that they had come to some interesting place and that this dungeon seemed to have its own secrets. Ji-hyun began to say that he knew that in such places you can find the right way with the help of clues. The guy stopped his colleagues and suggested that they first post their profiles because they had never fought together before. Ji-hyun activated his skill and started working on the characteristics of his fellow examinees. After a few seconds, Banjin-an and Banjin-woo's attack and agility levels are increased. The twins were incredibly impressed with Ji-hang's skills and sincerely thanked him for his help and gave him their likes. Ji-hyun once again realized that his expenses for the sake of others had come back to him in the form of bonuses. Now they could safely go to pass their exam and receive the title of hunter. Ji-hyun and the twins decided not to follow the path of Yomradu and his brother and set off through a secret passage. They walked slowly and looked around, expecting some monster to jump out at them. Meanwhile, Yomradu and his brother were moving forward, destroying all the lizards on their way, and did not even suspect the secret passages. After a while, Ji-hyun and his companions were approaching the end of the passage, and the boy warned Jin-an and Jin-woo to be more careful and ready for battle. Suddenly, Ji-hyun stopped and listened to something. He shouted to the twins that the monsters were already following them and told them that he would go ahead and that they should keep up. Ji Hyun thought that fortunately, the monsters couldn't get around them because the passage was narrow enough. He realized that he had to do his best to save his life, protect Jin-an and Jin-woo, and get the points for the exam. Ban Jin-an was not lagging behind and was ready to use her hammer for its intended purpose. Ban Jin-woo was also preparing to work hard to help Ji Hyun and his sister overcome the monsters. Two giant lizards were walking slowly along the dungeon corridor. As soon as they sensed that the hunters were nearby, the monsters rushed to attack Ji Hyun and the twins. The first attack of the giant lizard was not successful for it, but Ji Hyun skillfully deflected its blows and managed to kill it in one go, saving its life. Ban Jin-woo immediately began to apply his skills. He was ready to prove himself in this battle as best he could. His sister was also not far behind and struck a powerful blow with a hammer to the monster. The hammer dug into the lizard's body, causing irreparable damage. There were more lizards, and those who Ji Hyun did not have time to destroy were killed by Ban Jin-an and Ban Jin-woo. Ji Hyun managed to kill 5 lizards and was granted the status of a lizard fighter who was greatly feared by these monsters. The hunters stood around the lifeless bodies of the monsters, and Ji Hyun said that now they needed to process them, and the twins did not object. Ji Hyun looked at the bodies and wondered where best to start to get things done as soon as possible. Ji Hyun Ban, Jin Woo, and Ban Jin-an collected magic crystals from lizards when they collected their scales and blood. The work was finally completed, and the lizard parts and blood banks were distributed and properly stacked. Ji Hyun exhaled after the job was done and had already figured out what to do next. The guy immediately went to the store on the platform and hurried to buy the Scrooge's alchemy skill. Ban Jin-woo called his sister and said that Ji Hyun was doing something they didn't know about again. Ban Jin-an turned around and saw that her brother was right, but she didn't quite understand the boy's plans either. Ji Hyun swiped his hand and activated the skill he had just acquired, and now he could use it at any time he wanted. The young man had a cauldron in which he could brew various potions and magic neutralizers. Ji Hyun was very happy with his purchase because he did not expect it to be such a useful skill. The twins looked at the guy with the cauldron in his hands and asked what it was. Ji Hyun immediately replied that it was just his new alchemy skill and that he could use it to make potions. The twins couldn't believe that the young man could use so many skills so quickly and were very surprised that he had the skill of alchemy. Ji Hyun decided to try alchemy to see how it worked, but time after time it failed and the materials he used were simply spoiled. Finally, he managed to find the right elements and the right amount of them. Ji Hyun and the twins were happy that they had succeeded and would soon be able to move on. The young man managed to brew a potion, an ancient endurance potion made from the blood and scales of lizards. Ji Hyun was happy that he could get almost 100,000 bonuses for just one bottle of potion. But what a lot of work it took to make this ancient potion. To create just 5 bottles of the potion, the guy had to go through a series of failures. And besides, this potion took a lot of materials, more than a dozen giant lizards to be exact. The guy continued to make his potion, and the bonuses grew right before his eyes. In addition, Ji Hyun managed to complete the task he received at the beginning of the exam. And for completing it, the young man was immediately awarded 100 bonuses that he hadn't even expected. Ji Hyun logged onto the platform to check all his messages and received a notification asking if he wanted to receive bonuses right now. The young man was surprised that he could get points even before all the tasks were completed and decided not to give up this opportunity. The platform's system began to update, and now the guy could receive bonuses and likes even from his enemies. Ji Hyun didn't understand how the upgrade worked and didn't know how he could get bonuses from enemies. But there was no time to think for a long time because the monsters were very close and we had to fight. The giant lizard stopped for a second and prepared to attack the boy. Ji Hyun had no intention of stopping in his struggle because his official status as a hunter was at stake. As always, Ji Heng's speed of movement was impressive, and it seemed that the young man was developing his skills every minute. With each of his attacks, his powers only became more powerful and his strikes more accurate. One by one, the lizard lost its life to Ji Heng's weapon. Finally, it was clear how the update worked on the platform, and every time the enemies started to fear the guy, he was awarded bonuses. The guy mercilessly dealt with the monsters and seemed not to feel tired at all. Ji Hyun was happy that now he would get even more likes and bonuses, not only from his followers, but also from his enemies. Now he had the opportunity to collect even more bonuses to buy new skills and improve his skill level. The guy thought that now, with so many opportunities, he was losing a little bit of his excitement. Ji Hyun did not stop and destroyed all the monsters that tried to harm him and the band members. It was the first time Ban Jin-woo fought so many creatures from the dungeon, and he was glad that he was in a group with Ji Hyun. Ban Jin and also worked flawlessly, and time after time her hammer dealt critical blows to the giant lizards. Ji Hyun and the twins were already approaching the end of the corridor that would lead them to the next level. Jin Woo and Jin An stopped and stared in front of them, not knowing what was going to happen next. Ji Hyun decided to use his all-seeing eye skill to scan the space and know 100% what was ahead. In front of them was a giant door that looked like the entrance to the dungeon boss's room. They didn't know for sure if they really managed to reach the boss because he was usually at the very end of each dungeon. Ji-heng noted that they did not meet any big monsters on the way here, so this is probably not the end. Suddenly, Yom-Radu and the other hunters appeared, and the man was genuinely surprised that Ji-hyun and the twins had managed to get to the door unharmed. Ji-hyun also did not believe that Yom-Rad would be able to reach the last test. The boy did not understand why there were so many hunters with the man, and he assumed that Yom-Radu had joined them when he moved in the dungeon. Ban Jin-woo and Ban Jin-an watched everything that was happening, and simply kept silent so as not to endanger themselves. Ji-hyun and Yom-Radu stood opposite each other and were not going to give up the lead. Yom-Radu believed that he was the leader here, the one who should be the first to open the door and get into the room with the boss. But Ji-hyun knew perfectly well that they did not even know what was behind that door, and it would be foolish to risk their lives like that, so he did not interfere with Yom-Radu. The man walked up to the door and boldly opened it to go to further tests. He peered carefully into the back of the room to see if there were monsters or if it was safe to enter. The room was completely dark, so Yom-Radu called his allies and warned them to be careful. All the hunters came into the room, and Jin-woo told his sister that there seemed to be no traps, and Jin-an replied that she could see that, but she shouldn't relax. Ji-hyun realized that the entire exam had to end here, which meant that the hardest battle would take place in this room. Yom-Radu decided to light a fire to see something around him, because he could not see anything at all. Everyone followed the man, trying to keep up and not lose their vigilance. The hunters were heading deeper into the room when they suddenly heard someone further away. When everyone passed through the intermediate room, the entrance door abruptly closed. The hunters were very frightened because there was no way to escape in case of a threat. They realized that they had fallen into a trap from which it was impossible to escape. Slowly, the light in the room began to gradually dim, and the hunters were able to see the creature standing in front of them. The examinees could not immediately see properly because their eyes began to hurt from the sudden change in light. Ji-hyun tried to understand who was in front of them and what kind of threat they were facing. The guy did not understand whether this was the very monster they needed to defeat, and suddenly realized that they were facing not just a monster, but a real demon. Yom-Radu immediately began shouting for everyone to get ready for the attack, and not to gather in one pile, but to spread out throughout the hall. The hunters could not believe their eyes, and the fact that they were about to fight a demon. Following the order of the Yom-Rad, everyone began to scatter around the hall so as not to endanger each other. Ban Jin-woo said that this demon was really strong, and Ji-hyun, confirming the young man's opinion, said that he should move away. Ji-hyun couldn't understand why he didn't feel the demon's bloodlust, and didn't understand why it was so. And it was not clear why he was silent, and said only one phrase, that he wanted an offering of 2 people. The red demon stood on a pedestal and did not move, only occasionally saying his phrase. Yom-Radu's brother noticed that the demon just stood there and talked about the offerings, and Yom-Radu did not understand whether it was some kind of trap or whether they did not need to fight him. Ji-hyun decided to get closer and look at the demon. Maybe he could notice some important detail. He bravely approached to find something that could help him overcome the demon. Yom-Radu was shocked by Ji-hyun's actions and thought that the young man had simply lost his mind. When the boy was close to the demon, nothing happened. He just kept repeating the offerings. Ji-hyun looked at the enemy closely and still couldn't understand why he didn't move. The guy reasoned that the demon was just constantly repeating the same thing like a recorded record, and it was unclear whether he was going to attack them at all. The young man looked at the peaks and noticed that there were channels next to them where the blood would have flowed. After the sacrifice, Ji-hyun did not believe that the ending was supposed to be like this. The guy turned to the hunters and said that he did not think the demon would move now, and he explained that there was one nuance. The guy said that he thought the demon wanted to put 2 people on these peaks. The hunters were shocked that such a task could be given in a state exam, and Ji-hyun also realized that it was very strange because there had never been an exam of such difficulty before. It was very strange that the examiners asked for a real sacrifice on the hunter exam. Ji-hyun realized that hunters were people like everyone else who just had some peculiarities. It would be one thing if someone accidentally said goodbye to their life during an exam, but they were asking them to consciously say goodbye to their own lives, and none of those present would ever do that. At that moment, Yom-Radu seemed to go crazy and realized that they were unlikely to get out and just started waving his fists with all his might. He was desperately kicking the door, which was locked, but these actions made no sense. One of the hunters who was standing in the crowd grabbed his head and shouted that he knew something was wrong. He was crying out, not understanding why the leaders had locked them all in this place, and said that he did not want to die here. Ji-hyun realized that this was a very bad trend, and after a while everyone present would fall into a panic that would be difficult to handle if it became widespread. The guy realized that most likely new hunters had never been in such extreme conditions before. One of the hunters pulled out his weapon and started running at the demon, shouting that he was going to kill it. Ji-hyun tried his best to stop him because he realized that such actions were too dangerous. But the hunter did not hear him and ran confidently to strike the demon. He screamed for the demon to let him out of the room, but it was impossible until the conditions were met. The guy was already near the enemy and wanted to cut off his arm with his sword. But as soon as the sword touched the demon, it simply shattered into small pieces. The guy did not expect this to happen to his weapon, and now he was even more frightened. At the moment of the blow, the demon's eyes began to change, and it seemed as if he began to come to life and was filled with anger. Suddenly, lasers began to shine from the demon's eyes and attacked the young man, leaving him no chance to resist. The lasers shone with incredible power and simply destroyed everything that fell into their beam of light, and the guy who dared to attack the demon was destroyed. The hunters were shocked by what they saw, because they did not expect that someone could say goodbye to their life during the exam. Yomradu began to realize that it would not be as easy as he had hoped, and that he would have to work hard to stay alive. Ban Jin-an and Ban Jin-woo stood behind Ji-hyun, relying only on him, knowing that if they acted alone, they would end up like the young man. Ji-hyun looked at the remains of the guy who panicked and couldn't contain his emotions and couldn't believe that the exam was so difficult and dangerous. All those present were incredibly shocked by what happened because it was an exam and the guy lost his life for real. They rushed to the door and shouted that they had to get out of this place or no one would survive. The hunters did not understand how they were supposed to compete with a monster that had easily killed one of them. Ban Jin-an became ill from strong emotions of fear and despair, and Ban Jin-woo tried to calm her down. Ji-hyun thought that although the giant lizards were scary and dangerous, they could be defeated, but he did not know how to defeat the demon. The boy realized that this demon was much stronger than the monsters he had ever met. The hunters were going crazy because they couldn't get out, and one of them shouted that they had to do what the demon wanted, but no one was willing to give up their lives. They panicked because they did not understand how to get out if they could hardly defeat the monster with their skills. Ji-hyun realized that the process of panic had started, and now it would be quite difficult to bring everyone back to normal. One of the hunters shouted that the demon only wanted 2, so they had to decide who they would sacrifice. The hunters began to make noise, some shouting that they had to do what the demon wanted, others that no one wanted to say goodbye to life, and some saying that such an exam was inhumane. Yomradu banged on the door hard to stop the panic and ordered everyone to calm down, and he decided to propose his plan, saying that they could simply sacrifice the 2 weakest hunters. He claimed that the test would be completed if they fulfilled the demon's conditions, so they had to give up the weaker ones so that the stronger ones could protect humanity in the future. One of the men said that industrial-type hunters are the weakest and most likely have the lowest scores in dungeons. Someone pointed to the twins, who were the hunters, and it was said that they could do nothing at all, so they should be sacrificed. Ban Jin-woo already realized that he would have to defend his place and defend himself, so he asked his sister to hide behind him. Ji-hyun was very angry because the men were trying to turn everyone against the twins. The man shouted that we should choose them because someone will have to sacrifice themselves for the common good. Yomradu was very pleased that his plan worked and did not even have to convince the majority of the correctness of this decision. Ji-hyun was not going to accept this decision of the crowd and could not allow the twins to be killed. Yomradu did not stop in persuading the hunters, and everyone realized that they only wanted to save their own lives. Ji-hyun tried to stop this massive attack of madness and asked if they could really forgive themselves for such a terrible crime. He said that if they decided to make a sacrifice, all those present would automatically become murderers, and these words seemed to stop the audience a little. Ji-hyun said that if they all stick together, they will be able to stay safe and will not need to make any sacrifices. Yomradu didn't like the fact that the guy was ruining the plan he had proposed and started to get angry. Ji-hyun continued to speak and reminded all the hunters that there is no dungeon that cannot be completed. Everyone listened carefully to the boy and realized that he was right and that all the dungeons were indeed passable. Someone shouted out from the crowd that he really didn't want to make sacrifices and didn't want to die either, and another asked if the young man was sure that they could defeat this demon. Ji-hyun was mentally happy that he had managed to convince the hunters and said that they had to do it, and there was only one way to do it. The hunters didn't understand what kind of method Ji-hyun was talking about and whether they could trust him or not. Ji-hyun said that he would be the leader, and if something went wrong, he would become a victim for the demon, and asked if this was enough to be trusted. Yomradu certainly did not like the fact that Ji-hyun had instantly taken over the leadership. The hunters actively began to consult with each other about whether to accept the young man's offer, because many lives were at stake. Ji-hyun realized that he had to convince them that he could be trusted, because there were no other options. Yomradu realized that the guy had no plan of action, so he decided to just wait and see what he would do next. Ji-hyun started receiving bonuses for making the hunters unhappy and angry with the boy. In addition to the bonuses he received from his enemies, he also received bonuses of gratitude for saving the twins. There were also people who were inspired by Ji-hyun's words, so the chances of convincing everyone else increased. Ban Jin-an noticed that the hunters' animosity toward the twins was subsiding, and Ji-hyun's words made them calm down about offering the offering. The guy replied that it was true, but we shouldn't relax, because now everything is just beginning. Seeing how Ji-hyun inspired everyone, the hunters gradually began to come to their senses and began to prepare for the battle. Ji-hyun opened the platform's menu to view all the changes to his abilities and saw that the all-seeing eye skill had been upgraded to the highest level. The number of objects the boy could scan increased, and now he could even see some of the monster's characteristics. Ji Hyun was happy about this, because now he could learn more about the demon they were about to face in the fight. The young man scanned the demon and found out that it was living in a dungeon to become stronger. If they sacrificed to it, the demon would evolve and become a great demon baron. Ji Hyun realized why the monster didn't attack them. He hoped that they would fulfill his conditions and thus make him stronger. The guy turned to the hunters and said that he understood why the monster was not moving. One of the hunters did not expect the boy to learn anything about the demon and immediately asked why it did not move and whether they could defeat it. Ji Hyun said that he thought the demon was not attacking because it wanted to evolve with their help, and he also found out that it was a water demon. The hunters reasoned that if the monster was water, they should attack it with the attributes of wood and light, which meant they had a chance to win. Ji Hyun asked everyone to forget about quarrels because the demon was very cunning and disguised himself in this dungeon so that the real monster would not be recognized. Yomradu looked around and watched as all the hunters went over to Ji Hyun's side, but he did not understand who this demon was, so he had to listen to the guy to be able to survive. Ban Jinan approached Ji Hyun and cast a little magic to strengthen his weapon, noting that the spell would last for 1 hour. The guy thanked Jian, and she said that only thanks to him, her and her brother's level had risen, and now she could help and apply effects to weapons. All the hunters were ready to fight and rushed to the demon to start the battle. The hunters were confidently heading towards the monster, realizing that they simply had no other option. They surrounded the demon from all sides and waited for Ji Hyun's command, who took responsibility for leading the attack plan. Ji Hyun thought that if he was right, the monster would never attack them first. He immediately decided to use his shadow skill to reduce the demon's power, at least partially. The spirits responded to Ji Hyun's request, and he was able to use his abilities. The boy put his hand, filled with magic shadow, to the floor and started working for victory. He tried to find something else that could make the task easier and help save all lives. Ji Heng managed to summon the Black Dragon of Darkness, which was a very strong power, especially for a beginner. The 3 hunters were so impressed with the boy's abilities that the bonuses kept coming to Ji Heng. The young man reflected on the fact that the demon had reduced the hunter to ashes with just 1 attack and hoped that the spirit of darkness would work. Ji Hyun tried to gather all the darkness in himself and tried to take away the demon's eyes with his ability. Because the guy's level of darkness was quite low, the spell could only work for a while. A dark shadow began to envelop the demon and cover his eyes so that he could not see anything. Instantly, a dark bandage appeared over the monster's eyes and could not be removed. The demon did not understand what was happening because his eyes were almost his only weapon. The young man was happy that it worked and immediately warned everyone to be careful because the demon would move. Ji Hyun thought that it was very good that the monster had a very weak resistance to magic. He realized that it was impossible to defeat him physically, but magically it was possible. This is the rule of dungeon balance, and it didn't take long for the demon to come down from his pedestal. He jumped out and landed in the center of the hall, surrounded by hunters. The hunters were ready and began shouting to each other that they should attack with the attributes of wood and light. The battle was on, and the hunters began to attack the demon together because they realized that they had to act together. The level of the dungeon is easy enough to determine by competing with its inhabitants. Many experts are inclined to believe that dungeons are created artificially by manually moving and creating balance. The demon was furious and said that the hunters should not think that they could defeat him with only an eye. The monster wanted to destroy all those present, and it was possible because they could not get out, so they had only one way out, to win. The demon attacked, and one of the hunters almost lost his life. The guy realized that the monster is very strong even when he sees nothing. Ji Hyun made it in time to cover the young man who was unable to repel the demon's attack. The boy told the monster that he thought he was slower, and it was his mistake. Ji Hyun realized that the balance of the dungeon was not working. The demon realized that he was facing the one who had put the dark curse on him. The young man sarcastically asked why the demon was angry because he could not save his life with his beam, and thought that he had to distract the monster so that others could attack from behind. Ji Hyun did his best to provoke the demon so that it would hunt only him and not hurt others. The boy would take the monster away from the hunters so that they could strike without worrying about hitting someone else. Ji Hyun attacked the demon and was full of confidence because he could not show any doubt to the others so as not to lose his fighting spirit. The guy was moving with incredible speed and was a couple of steps ahead of the enemy. The demon was impressed by the young man's abilities and told him that he was quite good at his skills. Ji Hyun was concerned that the demon was able to catch up to him even with the speed he possessed. The hunters said that the monster was moving too fast to hit it. Yomradu didn't expect Ji Hyun to be so strong that he could avoid all the demon's attacks. Ji Hyun remembered that he had used the shadow spirit and could try to slow down the monster's speed. The boy stepped on the shadow of the demon, and his speed and part of his defense decreased. Ji Hyun realized that this demon was so strong that he could take his powers as long as he needed. The monster stopped and couldn't understand what the boy had done to slow down so much. As soon as the demon slowed down, the hunters began to strike from all sides, and the monster could not dodge them. Ji Hyun waited for the others to do some of their work. The hunters did not stop because they realized that they could overcome the demon right now, while its strength was temporarily reduced. And they all attacked together because their strength was in their unity, which the monster did not expect. The demon's body had wounds from the blows inflicted by the hunters. The monster used the restoration property and managed to heal all the wounds at once. The demon smiled and asked if they really thought they could defeat him. But the hunters did not lose hope and continued to strike. Everyone was more focused than ever and continued to work because they had a common goal. The suspension expired, and the demon launched another unexpected attack. Ji-hyun lost his guard for a moment and had to think of something to prevent the demon from attacking. At that moment, absolutely all hunters were in great danger. Yomradu decided that he could handle the monster alone and pushed everyone around. He shouted to the demon to taste what his fire tasted like and suggested that he try to dodge it if he could. The monster heard where the voice was coming from and turned to face its potential danger. And Yomradu struck a powerful blow, and the flames filled most of the hall. The monster clearly did not like the man's impudence and was very angry at the hunter's actions. The demon managed to get out of the epicenter of the explosion and was ready to destroy everything around him. Yomradu was ready to strike the monster again and told him not to worry because the man would roast him over a slow fire. The sparks from the flames still remained on the monster, which made it even more furious. The man struck without leaving the demon any opportunity to strike back. Yomradu confidently controlled his movements and skills to overcome the enemy and eventually complete the exam. The hunters even began to worry whether the man who dared to confront the demon on his own was okay. But Yomradu looked more than just confident. He sincerely wanted to become the hero of this battle and go down in the history of the exams as a powerful hunter who defeated the demon. He wanted the monster to go back to where it came from, so he was persistent and had no intention of stopping his attacks. Unexpectedly for Yomradu, the demon managed to outwit him and was already on top of the boy, saying that he did not have enough strength to overcome him. And at that moment, the monster struck a powerful blow to the hunter, which threw him a long way. Yomradu flew almost across the hall from the monster's powerful attack, for its powers were very powerful. The man was wounded by this blow and could not resist the demon. The hunter fell down from a great height and realized that he had most likely lost this battle. Yomradu fell with such force that a huge cloud of dust rose around him, through which nothing could be seen. The hunter was unable to continue the fight, and it was clear that he should not have attacked such a strong monster alone. Brother Yomradu immediately rushed to his aid, realizing that he could not do anything on his own, and asked others to help. The hunters were afraid because they considered Yomradu to be one of the strongest hunters, and now, after his defeat, they were afraid to attack this demon. Ji-hyun looked at Yomradu, and his brother said that everything was fine, and the man survived. The guy was angry because Yomradu did not listen to anyone and went on a breakthrough attack that should not have been made. The demon was angrier than ever that the hunters had disturbed him and forced him to fight them. Ban Jinwoo pointed to the monster and said that Yomradu's attack had most likely worked. The demon's back was damaged, and now the hunters have a better chance of winning. Something started glowing on the monster's back, something that looked like a ball. The demon was severely exhausted, and at the same time emaciated, and a green liquid began to emit from its mouth. Ji-hyun stopped for a second and thought that this ball might be the crystal ball that would end the test after it broke. Now the guy was sure that this was the bullet he had been talking about at the very beginning of the exam. The demon was furious and shouted that he would make everyone present writhing from the torment they would feel from the pain. The monster shouted that it would destroy everyone and began exhaling green smoke from its mouth like a fire-breathing dragon. The hunters did not expect that the monster had so much strength left that it would resist them so stubbornly. Everyone was shocked and didn't understand what that green smoke was that was eating away at everyone. Everyone present was in danger because it was impossible to escape the demon's magic. It was a poison that began to poison the hunters who found themselves in a locked room and had no way to escape. They were shouting to each other that they had to run away because if they got into that green smoke, they could say goodbye to their lives. The demon was furious and wanted to destroy everyone who tried to harm him. The smoke was spreading around the room at a high speed, and it was impossible to avoid getting it on yourself. One by one, he consumed the hunters who could not resist such strong demon magic. Ji-hyun tried to save himself and figure out what to do so that everyone present would not say goodbye to their lives. The guy realized that at this rate, the whole room would be filled with poison, and no one would be able to escape. The young man realized that in the end, he had no other choice and had to take a risk. Ji-han got a lizard berserker pill that decreased his stamina, but increased all other properties. The boy realized that if he did not try to do what he had planned now, all the hunters would remain in this dungeon forever. The young man was very nervous, but still took the pill, which lasted only 30 seconds. From that moment on, there was no time to hesitate. If not now, then never again will it be possible to overcome the monster. Ji-hyun realized that with the pill's effect, he had a chance to win and save all the hunters present. Instantly, the guy's eyes changed color to red, and his pupils became narrow, resembling the eyes of a lizard. Ji-hyun was losing his stamina, but all his other powers were increased by 200%, which was good news. The young man received a notification that in 30 seconds, he could take his life, so it was important to take the pill in time.